Finally, the player has reached the long-awaited end of the game. He has defeated the last boss. The main character was incredibly happy to complete the game. He did it. People watching the stream on the channel of an atypical nerd showered the player with congratulations. The guy was the first to complete this game. A game that boasts an unreal difficulty, the defense of an empire, and now, after 10 years of release, someone was able to complete it. The streamer has always said that no matter how difficult a game is, it exists to be played. A streamer who plays exclusively complex games, he was the first person to complete this absurdly difficult game. No one else has been able to pass the defense of the empire in the 10 years since its release. There is no better achievement for a gamer than to be honored with such an honor. But there is something that the player regrets. So sad that the saint died in the final battle. For an A-rank character, she went through a lot. The guy didn't know if it was because subscribers became attached to the characters while he played, but viewers hoped that they would all survive the final fight. However, in the end, everyone except the protagonist Larry died. With the final boss, the lake princess who can't sleep, the game was over, except that Larry was left standing in the same position. In front of the monster boss he killed, on top of a mountain of corpses of enemies and allies. Iron Man mode, in which progress is forced to be saved. If one of the characters dies, the player cannot go back and start again. Even though Larry was only a character in the game, he always looked a little sad from the back. Michael sat staring at the screen. He felt a certain bitterness after the end of the game. One of the commentators asked if the developers shouldn't give out some kind of prize. The gamer clearly deserved something. The main character denied why he needed a reward. As long as he could have so much fun with his audience, he didn't need anything else. Michael continued to convince the audience, but the commentators saw greed in his eyes and assured that if the developers offered a reward, the guy would certainly accept it. Mr. A, who created the game, disappeared a long time ago and did not make a sequel. The director, Mr. A, contacted the player. Ross did not prepare for this. The streamer's comments exploded. The audience was delighted that the creator of the game contacted the guy. To begin with, he wanted to thank the player. The director had already given up, thinking that no one could succeed. But as soon as Mr. A saw that Larry had succeeded, he experienced real pleasure. After the directors said that they still had hope, Michael wondered if the developers really wanted to create a defense for Empire 2. The guy proved his worth and how good his skills are. Mr. A asked Ross to come and help them. The main character could not believe it. He thought that one of the viewers was looking for attention. The director of the Empire's defense could not be on the stream of subscribers. He demands attention so much. Everything began to float around. The character's head began to spin. The world became less clear and began to double. Ross couldn't see much anymore. The computer was somewhere far away. The streamer did not understand what was happening. He decided that it was all because the guy had been playing for a long time. The objects had almost lost their outlines, leaving only glints of light in the dark room. The main character decided that subscribers would call for help if he fainted. Michael didn't see it anymore, but on the screen, the director thanked the guy for playing in defense of the Empire. The character woke up in the game and screamed, "Playing games is one thing, but being in them is a completely different thing." The building collapsed, and fragments of concrete flew directly at Michael Ross. This alignment did not suit the guy. He could not believe that he was in another reality. The main character crouched down and covered his head with his hands in an attempt to hide from the wreckage. After that, the guy smelled gunpowder. There was a cannon somewhere nearby. It was right next to the player. He hadn't even seen it before. There were two in armor standing near the cannon. On the battlefield, the situation changed too quickly. It managed to exhaust the character. A new shot rang out. The main character began to ask to stop all this. Then the guy saw red flags carried by a whole army of opponents. The allies were screaming. They were doing everything they could to prevent the enemy from rising. The main character sat on the ground and just watched. Everything looked too real. It seems that the characters are in the midst of the war. The panic has begun to recede. As Michael sat on the ground and pondered what was happening, a man took notice of him. The character rushed to the guy, calling the main character His Majesty. The armored man was excited. He was interested in the condition of the Emperor's son. But this character is an enemy soldier, which significantly frightened the player. Ross held out his hands in front of him and asked the stranger not to approach him. The man, perplexed, began to close the distance between him and His Majesty. The guy begged not to approach the knight. After that, the servant fell to his knees, bowed his head, and began to ask for forgiveness. The man asked the prince to have mercy on his servant and not to kill him. There was clearly something wrong with this old man. For Michael, such an attitude was too much. The main character decided that it was necessary to raise the man. The guy did not understand anything. As soon as the player began to say that he needed to calm down first, something strange appeared in the sky. There was another explosion. This time the bomb was from the enemy. Ross was thrown back. The streamer panicked again. He could have died right now, but fortunately, he survived. Everything in the area was filled with a green cloud from the exploded bomb. Many who were hit died in agony. The enemy was attacking. The knights were ready to rush into battle with the enemy. Suddenly, something huge and very fast, similar to tentacles, appeared. The main character was a little taken aback. The tentacles were so fast that the knight did not have time to fight them off. As a result, his tentacles pierced through. The knight's body hung lifeless on the monster's tentacle, a monstrous sight. After that, the bloody metal armor fell right in front of the main character. The monster defeated the entire army of the Emperor's son. The streamer sat on the ground and did not know how he could escape. Finally, the monster that had defeated the battalion came out of hiding and headed straight for the guy. Other knights rushed to help. They saw the spider and began to think about how to immobilize it. The monster cut them into pieces. The main character was again left alone with the spider. From fear, Michael's body was paralyzed. He could not only run away, he could not even move a finger. The monster was getting closer and closer, its paws piercing the ground, leaving holes in its wake. The main character felt like he was in a terrible dream. The spider was getting closer and closer. The monster had gone out to kill the emperor. This situation was too unbelievable. To die like this, laughter even for chickens, Ross's whole life flashed before his eyes. Then a noble knight appeared. He came to save the emperor's son from a terrible monster. The guy easily cut the spider into two parts. It is impossible to believe that he managed to defeat the monster so easily. In front of Michael stood a blond young man in shining armor. He reminded someone of the main character. After that, the knight fell to his knees. He was worried about his lord, who looked very bad. Then the streamer realized who the blonde reminded him. He had been looking at this character for 10 years. It was Larry. The knight thought that the emperor had been hit well on the head. But Larry was glad that His Majesty had called the knight by name for the first time. Despite the fact that the guy served half of his life to the emperor, he could never remember his name. Michael understood. Only now did he understand what had happened. The puzzles came together into a single picture. The main character found himself inside such a familiar game, which he had been playing for 10 years. Chaos, war, explosions reign around. The empire is engulfed in fire and monsters. Ross was in a complete ass. It's a game with the hellish complexity that can only be. Empire Defense is a game where you have to constantly kill someone. Endless hordes of monsters that rush inside. This is a game with damn complex defensive mechanics. No one except an atypical nerd could complete the game. On the backs of monsters, there were formations similar to catapults. They synthesize a poisonous explosive substance. And then, having collected a sufficient amount of explosives in a special recess, the substance is pressed and, like a bomb, flies directly into the fortress of the empire. The core not only gives a powerful explosion, but also kills all living things around with its poisonous fumes. Such explosives fell not far from the emperor's son, but he was lucky. He stands further than the radius of destruction. It was hard for the main character to realize the fact that he was not just in the game, but in the most difficult game. The guy's thoughts were interrupted by Larry. He saw that the emperor's son was lost and did not know what to do. The knight explained, "The enemy that is attacking the empire right now is the Black Spider Army. They may lose their forward base of operations, but these spiders are not active after sunset. And the sun will set in 30 minutes. And until that time, you need to kill these creatures as much as possible. The prince's task remains to do everything possible to hold out until sunset." Michael couldn't understand why Larry was trying to protect him or who he was now. As soon as the sun set below the horizon, the servants of the emperor's son came out of hiding and began to search for survivors and wounded. Larry was glad that the sun had finally set and the spider army had retreated. The main character looked down thoughtfully at the bodies of the slain monsters. Ross asked his knight what date it was and where he was. "Today is the last day of February 649. According to the imperial calendar, it is a forward operating base located at the intersection of roads of Fortress City. It turns out that tomorrow is the 1st of March, 649. Such news did not please the streamer. The 1st of March, 649 according to the imperial calendar, the monsters attacking the forward operating base. A very familiar situation for a guy in a very familiar place. Having spent 6 months playing the game of defending the Empire, Michael has been to this location hundreds of times on exactly the same plot date, undergoing training. Sick in the head is the third prince of the Empire, the worst commander because of whom a huge number of soldiers died in the Fortress City. The character who died the most horrible death in the plot is Jason D. Kemble Urton. In this character as Michael, the main character was completely unprepared for this role. The guy stood near the mirror and cursed at himself. Couldn't he just sit on his ass quietly? So you can go crazy, Jason was in his room and tried to comprehend what was happening. A classic defensive game, Defend the Empire, the reasons why this game is known as something impassable. The difficulty of the Hell level, as well as the Iron Man mode, which forcibly saves the process. Combining both, the difficulty of the game was called Iron Man's Hell. And Kemble is the only one who has gone through this mode. It would seem that he doesn't care at which of the moments of the game he gets into. He is confident in his abilities, and that he will be able to find a way out. The tutorial was designed so that the player would fail no matter what. Because the story begins after Larry alone escapes from an invasion of monsters. In this game, and the plot lasts 3 years, you can start hunting the army of black spiders only after a year and a half. And how, according to the developers, Jason should defeat hundreds of these creatures at the very beginning. The guy decided to put his worries and fears aside. If the streamer combines his knowledge with experience, he will definitely be able to find a way out. Looking at the characteristics, the main character noticed that he simply did not exist. Kemble quickly realized that he was in complete shit. Then the guy looked into the characteristics of spiders. Spider levels start from 55 and above. There are more than 1,000 of them here. In addition, the strength of the fortress wall at the very bottom, the only thing that can be used is the mana cannon. The chances of winning are too small. Jason must find even the highest probability of success. When playing a game with Iron Man mode, it becomes impossible to just make a save and start over if something happens. The moment the player messes up, the whole game will be in ruins, so it's important to calculate every action to the millisecond. Playing this game for the last 6 months, the streamer realized something. In any situation, you need to do something, and there is always a way to survive. You need something with a slightly better chance of survival, something you can be at least a little sure of. The main character jumped out into the street and began to call Larry. The night was not far from the prince. Jason demanded that the squad be assembled under his direct control. Larry was perplexed, Kemble referring to his guardsmen. The main character had never called them before. Why so suddenly Jason interrupted the night and demanded to call them? The Emperor's son has come up with a way to win tomorrow's battle against his opponents. Larry urgently gathered all the guardsmen. The characters gathered in the middle of the night. His Majesty saw familiar faces in the visitors, a red-haired girl named Amelia, a stern, pumped-up, dark-haired man named Coleman, and a modest guy with glasses who closed himself in his lap named Daniel. If only they were not familiar to the main character, he saw events in which they died countless times. The main character wondered why Daniel curled up. He's like that because he lost his comrade today. The boy is shattered by such a loss. Suddenly, Kemble realized that Daniel was in the same state when the player was trained. Since he had some kind of strange status imposed on him from the beginning, he died first. Jason remembered that he couldn't use the boy's skills, even though he was a healer, literally the most important role. The prince began by explaining to the guards their roles tomorrow. Amelia's class is a mage. Her element is fire. Her task will be to inflict as much damage as possible on enemy troops. She is able to strike with one powerful spell after another. The girl will be a shield. She will need to block the attacks of spiders as a tank, a player who distracts the enemy's attention to himself and takes damage. As for Coleman, he is a shield man capable of deterring enemy attacks on the front lines. He uses his skill to attract attention and then takes damage with his body. Coleman will have to infiltrate the mid lane and make a mess there. Now Daniel, he is a healer, a very important class in the game. From now on, he is a marksman in this squad. He will need to shoot at the most important enemy targets. Larry is the last one left. He will command the soldiers and maintain the front line. The main character asked everyone who is dissatisfied with something to speak. Coleman slammed his fist against the wall. The man was furious, considering this plan a real failure. The man was furious that the prince said all this in all seriousness. He dragged everyone into a dangerous situation because of the Fig Squad. Well, it wasn't the main character, but the character Jason, who was before the guy got into the game. In any case, this is a location that cannot be passed by standard methods. And in order to pass this location, you need to become the most insane in relation to the prince as well as the supreme commander. Coleman still dares not to comply with subordination. The man's rage was replaced by fear. Goosebumps ran down his spine. Coleman immediately began to apologize to His Majesty. After all, if a streamer loses his grip, it's all over for him. Since the plan of the protagonist is reckless, he must make them obey, not daring to snap back. The Emperor's son swung and stabbed one of his subordinates with his dagger. Everyone opened their mouths with surprise and horror. They did not expect such actions from the commander. The injured Amelia did not even understand what had happened. She felt a sharp pain in her shoulder. Later, His Majesty said that each of them was able to carry out the assigned tasks. Since the main character ended up in the body of a psycho, why doesn't he adopt the behavior of the character? The guardsmen looked at Jason and couldn't believe how valuable a mage was. How can you go into battle when the squad is commanded by such a person? Suddenly, the blade caught fire and the flames lit up the entire room. The characters were shocked. All starting characters have a hidden skill that completely contradicts their roles. Afterwards, the Emperor's son asked Amelia if she had been injured as a child when a horde of goblins invaded her village. After this incident, the girl gained the Fireskin skill, a skill created by the fear of O, created by the fear of sharp weapons. As long as there is enough mana, she can defend herself against any physical attack. The protagonist decided to squeeze everything out of this skill, a location that cannot be passed. Then Jason has no choice but to use cheats. The streamer decided to pass this insurmountable location at any cost. After that, the Emperor's son put away the dagger and apologized to Amelia, his method of proof being very crude. The girl replied embarrassedly that everything was fine, but she wondered how the prince knew about this ability. Coleman was next in line. The man had a lump in his throat. As a child, he was a petty thief from the slums, and the family had many mouths to feed. It was not easy to become a knight with such a past. The hair on Coleman's body stirred, as the Emperor's son could know about it. Jason replied that it doesn't matter how he knows it now, it's how a man can use his skills. He can become invisible anytime he wants. He can hide to avoid attention. The knight was silent. The main character demanded that the man confirm his words. Otherwise, Kemble would have to give another example. The knight bowed and replied that His Majesty was quite right. And finally, it was Daniel's turn. The guy was huddled against the wall and was afraid to move. The most important person in this regard is the healer. The shooter, he has incredibly good eyesight. That was why he was able to see his friend's death so clearly. They were from the same city and grew up in the same orphanage, almost brothers. In the midst of the battle, he sacrificed himself for Daniel so that he could continue to live. The boy burst into tears, wondering why the Emperor's son had brought everyone here. Daniel did not understand what a great goal His Majesty was pursuing. Could it be that their cheap lives were nothing more than a toy for the prince? The boy asked to bring Wendon back, begged to bring back his friend. It was painful for everyone to look at the grief-stricken young man. His sufferings took place. The main character had no choice but to support the grief-stricken healer. Jason said that Daniel could blame him and even despise him. But his friend Wendon sacrificed himself to save his life. Is the boy going to sit here and wait for death? Does the healer really want to give up the life for which his friend died, just because he is on the verge of death because of a stupid commander? Daniel must grab any thread and avenge him, kill spiders, and teach His Majesty a lesson. Jason asked the boy if he wanted to kill those damn spiders, to which he received a positive answer. Then he asked the next question, much more complicated, whether the healer wanted to kill the commander. After a long silence, the main character received a positive answer. Such an answer brought a smile to the warlord's face. He said that Daniel would be the one who would take his life whenever that happened. Such words made Larry angry. How dare His Majesty say that? In case of failure, they are all doomed to die anyway. If it happens, Jason will allow the healer to be the one who will take his life. The main character swore on the honor of the imperial family, after which he asked for one day. Only one day to follow the orders of the commander. Hope appeared in Daniel's eyes. Sometimes hatred should be used as an engine. even if this hatred is directed at the main character. The healer accepted the conditions of his commander and was ready to fight for him. The prince admitted that because of his mistake, the army was almost destroyed and there was no excuse for this. But if everyone follows his plan, then they will be able to drive these farts away, albeit small, but there is a chance to win. Therefore, the squad only needs to believe its commander once, and do as he says. Finally, Jason's squad. His right arm is assembled and ready to follow his directions. But whether this royal hand turns out to be a straight, a flush, or just a mistake, dawn has come. The protagonist has no choice but to put everything on the line. An army of black spiders on their way to the Empire. They are marching. The knights asked if the prince was okay. The player replied that the men had nothing to worry about. An army of spiders was approaching. The plan was as simple as a steamed turnip. But would it work? While teammates buy time, the squad must find the queen who gives orders. And then you need to blow up her side to hell with this mana gun. By removing the restriction, they had amplified her magic power quite well. Now she should even damage the queen. The only problem is her location. It is not possible to see the queen from such a distance. Human eyes are simply not capable of this. Then it is worth creating a map. Campbell's skill is map making, the ability to see an entire area as a mini-map. The main character was disappointed. There was no boss mark here. The goal of the mission, the enemy queen, is not displayed on the map. The Emperor's son took care of his team and collected all the stamina potions left in the fortress. Coleman's task is to go outside and attract attention. The knight equipped himself with potions. Amelia has a painful role. The girl cowered with fear. Her body trembled. In the event that spiders infiltrate an artillery unit, the commander expects the girl to use the skin from fire skill and block the entrance. Larry did an excellent job with the command of the rest of the army. The knights were ready for battle and had already taken up their positions. Spiders were already on the way. They were preparing to attack people. The army must hold out. They need to buy time until the commander can cope with the queen. Larry looked back at His Highness. The prince had a confident and calm expression on his face, and this means that the commander has completed all the preparations. But Jason's face did not express confidence and calm. Everything had already gone wrong for him. The army has fired fire arrows. The battle has begun. Now you need to do everything possible to win. Fire arrows worked well against spiders. Enemies suffered damage. Larry coped with his task perfectly. The hope of victory only grew stronger. It remains only to remain calm. The purpose of training is not to kill the boss. So it is not surprising that the queen is not on the map. Probably, the boss will appear after a full-scale attack. They have a reliable rear and guards, which were prepared in case of unforeseen situations. The main character had an idea. He called Daniel and pointed to the mountains. The boy looked at the spiders that were sitting there doing nothing. The queen must be among them. Daniel needs to find her. The sight of the boss gave the healer goosebumps. Is the commander really talking about a monster? The upper part of which is from a man and the lower part from a spider. This is exactly what the Emperor's son was looking for. The boss looks frightening. The main character ordered the artillery installation to be deployed to the southwest. The charge of the small one is complete. Daniel will aim. The boy was afraid of such a burden of responsibility and wanted to refuse. He wasn't sure he could handle it. Daniel had never done anything like that. Then the commander put his hand on the boy's shoulder and said that he had the right to miss. The prince would take all the responsibility. Even if the healer fails and messes things up, all the responsibility will fall on Jason. The responsibility always lies with the commander. The soldiers only do what they are told. The protagonist reminded Daniel that he was avenging Wendon. Hearing this, the boy activated the eye skill 1,000 miles away. The boy boldly took up his work. He reached for the lever and aimed at the queen. On command, the mana cannon fired directly into the spider's lair. The projectile hit the target, right in the center of the monster's pandemonium. The boy impressed the knights. They happily began to hug him. Daniel told the men that the moment he pulled the trigger, his body was acting on its own. In the game, he was a character who couldn't hold a gun in his hands, but here he only had to touch him. It would seem that victory is in hand, but the prince drew attention to the fact that the spiders continue to walk. The streamer rushed to the Ferris pipe to see for himself that the plan didn't work. Jason saw the queen, unfortunately alive. She was furious. What he saw frightened the main character. You will have to use another plan. Such a blow was supposed to kill the boss. The commander thought that they did not hit the target. The spiders head straight for the artillery unit. The queen sent out her orders damn quickly, and the spiders immediately began to carry out the order. Coleman had only one potion left. He began to think about just running away. The vibrations spread throughout the area. Just at that moment, Daniel fell into a cluster of spiders with a mana cannon. Jason watched the enemies. They continued to move forward very quickly. The queen is still alive. Perhaps the cannon lacks damage. Originally, the Black Spider Queen would have died in 1 or 2 blows. After all, it is not that strong compared to battle-type monsters. But there is no information about the queen of this training location. Jason's panic was interrupted by a knight who informed him that due to a powerful explosion of the mana core, the cannon would soon reach its limit. In addition, it has suffered a lot of damage. They can shoot it as much as they expected. The prince asked how many shots were left. Initially, there were 5. 2 shots were already there. There were 3 left. 3 shots. The protagonist has no choice but to finish off the queen in 3 shots. Daniel's eyes turned red. It seemed that eyes 1,000 miles away had a side effect. 3 shots, whether the guy can hold out until then, while still being able to shoot. The walls of the central castle do their job well, but here the destroyer was already on the way. There was nothing like this in the game. The commander gave the order to defend. It was necessary to direct all fire at the destroyers. Army attacks gave too little damage. The destroyers were practically unharmed. At this rate, the walls of the castle will collapse and will collapse. Then the spiders will break into the fortress. In a matter of minutes, the walls were breached. The spiders made their way inside. Larry ordered the knights to take up arms, and the battalion descended to the first floor. Jason ordered his subordinates to pull themselves together. Those below are protecting them. The task of this base is to keep shooting at the queen. Before these creatures get to the artillery unit, you need to finish off the boss. Daniel finished his preparations, his eyes fixed on the hated queen. Shot confirmed hitting the boss, but she is still alive. The main character gave the order to immediately reload the cannon for the next shot. Larry bravely fought the spiders in the front ranks, along with hundreds of other knights. The spiders flew to pieces. The battalion successfully coped with the task. Larry motivated his subordinates. They were obliged to protect the imperial prince. There are too many enemies. Can the army cope with such a number? The army suffered heavy losses. Many people died in this battle against spiders. The number of victims continues to rise. A cold sweat runs through Jason's body. When he played the game, he did not know that all of them, real people, the number of dead soldiers reached 150. Death is not just a number accompanied by heartbreaking screams and horrible smells. The mana cannon is too hot. You need to put your hands on it to cool it down. Only 5 shots, everything will collapse. They will hardly reach 4. The main character was in a panic. He did not know what to do. The way out of the situation did not come to mind at all. Then Coleman got down to business. He overcame his fear and entered the battlefield. He stood in the opening of the broken wall and bravely attracted the attention of the spiders. The man finished the last elixir and proudly shouted that he was a knight of the empire. The distraction worked, and the army of spiders rushed after him. Coleman, according to the plan, diverted the enemies from the empire and directed their attention in the other direction. The knight dived behind the stone. Why don't the spiders try to find him? The character has activated the pickpocket survival method skill. Kemble was concerned about his knight's condition. His health level was too low. The level of health was insufficient. The use of the skill was rejected. Coleman found himself surrounded by an army of spiders, completely alone. He was not supposed to trust the prince. The man knew from the beginning that this plan was a failure, but the captain's speech made him trust the player. The protagonist was aware of the possible loss of Daniel, but Coleman's death was a blow to him. Jason could hear the sound of flesh tearing even from here, and a sense of guilt overwhelmed him for the death of his comrade. His erroneous commands cost another person's precious life. The man's life from the very beginning was not easy. He was able to make his way into the world and become an imperial knight. His family was left alone. The imperial army was delighted with Coleman's feat. He single-handedly advanced the line of defense. It was impossible to retreat. Everyone who is there loses their lives because of the prince's only order. It's not just the protagonist's fault, it's him who kills them all. While playing this game, Jason used the knights as bait whenever it was necessary. This damn game was designed in such a way that to save someone, get an item, or complete a side quest, someone has to die. And the streamer was happy to sacrifice them. He did not doubt a single deed that he did. But now Jason realized the meaning of everything he had done so far. Realized that any death is accompanied by heartbreaking pain. The prince shouted at the top of his lungs for the monsters to stop, but they wouldn't stop. Suddenly the monster stopped. Or rather, someone stopped it. Larry even defended his commander from the first line of defense. The knight asked how the prince was feeling and whether he was okay. Campbell's thoughts stopped. That's right, the only option that could make the monsters stop. It is to kill them before they kill the main character. There is nowhere to retreat. The servant informed His Majesty that the cannon was loaded for the fourth shot, but Daniel could not. The prince turned to the healer and asked if he could shoot. Blood poured from the boy's eyes. It hurt him, but gathering all his courage into a fist, he replied that he could shoot. A fourth shot rang out, much more powerful than the previous ones. Everyone froze in anticipation. The spiders did not seem to be enough. This time they took a lot of damage. The Spider Queen did not like such actions, she screamed in rage. The shot hit the head of the spider boss, however. The queen is still alive. She was not killed even with 4 shots. Everything should have been much easier. Despair seized the detachment. All the members of the rifle division drooped. Their attacks have no effect on the queen, the only weapon being useless against the monster. The gun is at its limit. If the shooters try again, it will simply explode. The servant said that it was all over. He offered to surrender to the enemy. The man no longer believed in victory. The streamer understood that the knight was right. He did not want to think that this was the end. The cannon is on the verge, and the line of defense is broken. Daniel can't even open his eyes. Is this really the end? Is there really no hope left? Suddenly there was good news. The shooters had no doubt caused damage. The queen's skin has peeled off. It is no longer as active as before. The hope of salvation has been revived. The scout, even in such a situation, remained true to his role to the end. If you try to shoot again, the spider boss will be destroyed. Suddenly there was an explosion. A bomb flew right into the tower where the prince was. Larry turned around at the sound and saw an explosion. The guy was afraid for his highness. Jason D. Kemble fell into the abyss, stone slabs falling on top of him. Everything is destroyed. The whole world, the hope for victory, absolutely everything is littered with debris. The main character heard a familiar voice very close. Everything was double in his eyes. Larry was in time. He covered the commander-in-chief's son from the heavy plate with his body. The blonde guy looked very bad. He took care of the prince's condition to the last. Kemble was concerned about his comrade's condition, but suddenly he saw. The blood pooled under Larry, and the knight was badly wounded. The guy asked if His Majesty remembered that event 20 years ago. But the main character could not remember this. Like a player who occupied someone else's body, he has no memories of either Larry or himself. The knight decided to remind him of the time when the prince appointed him as his personal guard. He said something. On that day, Jason said that even if he couldn't become emperor, he would become the coolest person in the world, just like the one who became his knight. Although it was back in the days when Larry was a teenager, the prince's words touched his heart so much that the boy had not forgotten them until today. He had always strived to be the best knight for the prince. After Larry said that he trusted His Highness, Jason was kneeling in front of the dying knight. The main character could not believe what he heard. He asked again if Larry really trusted him even now. The guy believed in the prince even now, more than ever. The knight's strength was running out. After these words, the personal guard of the emperor's son fell, crushed by the slab. The main character removed the stove from his comrade and sat on his knees next to the body. Jason did not lose hope. He asked Larry to hold on because he is the main character. He is the savior of this world. The player decided that he had to end it all. They were somewhere under an artillery unit. The streamer did not know how long he had been unconscious. Then Kemble noticed the cannon and the gunners. Daniel and all the gunners, fortunately, it seems that they escaped fatal injuries. The same cannot be said about the cannon. The emperor's son wondered why they were still alive. Then Amelia's voice was heard from under the rubble. She was all on fire. This is not the end. The spiders attacked the wounded girl, her body defending itself as best it could. Amelia asked the commander. She wanted to hear from his lips that this was not the end. Jason rushed to the girl, but she stretched out her hand in order to stop the prince. Amelia said that she would not last long. The mage took out a recovery elixir. The girl will not last long as she can block the entrance. Soon the monsters will besiege everyone and break through the walls. The mage asked the commander to hurry up and not let the crew die in vain. Jason ordered the gunners to stand up and load the last shell. But the gunner was unsure of the order, because they had already said that the gun was at its limit. If the squad continues to do nothing, everyone will die under the paws of the spiders. Those who do not take risks do not drink champagne. The commander said that they should do it, even if they have to burn alive. The artillerymen asked how the prince was going to aim. They could not see anything from here. They could not find the queen in such a position. The cannon rack is lost. You will have to hold the gun with your hands. Jason replied that there was no need to aim. Daniel just needed to take a shot. The commander-in-chief gave the order to load the last shell. He doesn't know exactly how the 1,000-mile eye skill works, but as long as Daniel shoots, he will always hit the target. So all that's left to do is just believe. The prince approached the healer and said that he needed to shoot one last time. Jason asked the boy to gain strength for the last time, but the healer could hardly see. Daniel asked the commander what was the point of all this. No matter what he did, nothing changed. The main character convinced the boy that if he hit again, the monster would die. But that's not the point. Let's say Daniel pulls the trigger again and the queen really dies. But what will change? Half of the boy's friends are already dead. Even if he destroys all the enemies, he will not be able to bring them back. No matter how hard he works, no matter how hard he tries, this world continues to take something away from the healer. Jason could not stand it anymore and screamed, "Does the boy really think that this world is unjustifiably cruel? Does he really think that even if he overcomes a huge obstacle in his path, life will continue to be hell?" Daniel said that he thought so. The commander grabbed the guy and continued, "If there is a difficulty level in this world, then it is definitely hellish, with an Iron Man mode that cannot be saved. This place is absurdly unfair, and nothing will ever be the way you want it to be. They live surrounded by a devastating landscape. Is Daniel ready to stop fighting? Did he really want to give up and lie down, waiting for death? Was that a worthy reason?" The guy replied in the negative. Then the commander continued that they should continue to fight until they died. The main character said that he would fight, and come up with more and more new strategies until the very end. And if Daniel wants to die so much, let him slit his throat with his sword right now. Have enough courage, let him follow the order, and if the guy's a coward, then let him be his trigger. Stop looking back at his dead friends. The only one Daniel needs to continue is Kemble as commander. With his speeches, the main character has unlocked a new skill of an indomitable commander. Jason said that all the guy had to do was take a shot and smash the monster's ugly face. The healer gathered his strength and replied that he would carry out His Majesty's order. The last shell is loaded, but the gunners cannot cool the gun at this rate. The commander took it upon himself to hold the gun personally, since it could not be cooled. The servant wanted to warn the commander that it was incredibly hot, and if he touched it, the consequences would be worse than just a moderate burn. The main character was ready to burn here rather than go to hell and burn there. Daniel couldn't see or feel anything, but Jason calmed him down. The commander said that everything was fine. He just needed to shoot. He had no doubts about the guy. The cannon heated to incredible temperatures, burning everything around. The streamer was literally burning, the hot air burning his face. And the red-hot metal melted his hands, even through gloves. Jason screamed in pain. The archers, inspired by the prince's feat, rushed to his aid. The men, despite the pain, picked up the cannon and pointed it in the right direction. There was a destroyer on the way, but he will not be able to interfere with the commander. The entire team sought to exceed their limits, either now or never. Daniel, through blindness, pain, and burns, aimed directly at the Spider Queen. Having gained enough mana, the boy pulled the trigger. The shot turned out to be so powerful that it smashed the closer walls of the fortress. The main character, losing consciousness, prayed that the guy would hit the target. Initially, it was an impossible task to shoot at the enemy, whom it is impossible to see from the bottom of the destroyed front. It would seem that there is no chance of winning, but the projectile flies straight towards the Spider Queen. Ignoring height, ignoring distance, and hundreds of thousands of other monsters. As if he were following the chosen path, he flew towards the queen, that he screamed in fear and anger, and hit her right in the head without the slightest error, just took and blew her side to hell. The gamer did not know how to respond to the first comment from the viewer when he first started streaming. The main character tried to remember what he answered then, but he could not. There was simply no answer to this question in his head. Jason opened his eyes. These thoughts were just a dream. He was still in defense of the Empire. Kemble tried to get up, but the pain all over his body did not allow him to do so. A voice was heard that advised him to lie down. The main character is still alive. He managed to defeat the spiders and prevent the attack. The voice said that Daniel healed the Emperor's son with magic at the end of the battle. But since the burns were too bad, it would take longer to recover. Amelia was sitting at the table. Jason was glad to see her. The girl replied that the prince slept for 3 days. The mage was already worried that the Emperor's son would not wake up, considering what he had to go through to defeat the spider army. The protagonist looked at Amelia and did not believe that she was alive, all thanks to the commander's command. After the last shot, the queen died, and the spiders froze and stopped moving. The army of the Empire defeated the spiders, despite the fact that there was almost no chance of victory. The knights dismantled the landslides and delivered the corpses of their comrades. Some were able to survive until help arrived and escape. The support army collected the bodies of all allies and also took care of the spiders. Emilia was worried about severe burns on the hero's arms, shoulders, and neck, and when he arrived home, he would have to visit the church. But even after a full recovery, a couple of scars will remain. Scars are a more modest price to pay than life. The commander asked how Amelia was feeling. She had serious injuries. When the mage ran out of mana, the spider wounded her back, and immediately afterwards the queen died and was not attacked. But apparently, due to damage to the lumbar nerves, the lower part of the girl no longer moves. The words ran like thunder through Jason. He was head-on faced with a cruel reality that is not shown in games. Emilia asked His Majesty not to worry. She was grateful to be alive. Among the survivors are 5 artillerymen: Larry, Daniel, Amelia, and the main character. 9 people. At the beginning, there were several hundred of them, and 9 people remained. Jason wondered if there was another way. Maybe he could have avoided such sacrifices. Another tactic that the player overlooked suddenly could have been different. Shouldn't there have been a way to save at least one more person? Jason's anxious thoughts were interrupted by Amelia, who reminded him that the prince was not a god. In the current situation, there was no way to save everyone. He did everything he could. Jason replied that he was the one who brought the people here, even if it was the old Kemble and not specifically the player, but he is in the body of the character and is responsible for it. Who would have thought that these monsters would move in crowds after so many decades? Why did no one stop the prince's military campaign at all? Emilia asked His Highness not to be so herself. Suddenly there was a voice so familiar, a voice that Jason feared he would never hear again. Larry was so happy that his commander woke up. The knight was very worried. The guy was interested in how His Highness was feeling. Larry could call Daniel if necessary. The main character stopped the knight and asked how Larry was feeling. After all, he himself was seriously injured. The main strength of the guy is to be very cool. He is SS rank and recovers quickly. Larry finished the list of those killed in battle. Many bodies could not be found. Kemble asked where the corpses were. He wanted to go and look at them. The comrades wanted to stop the prince, but he replied that these lies had died under his command. Larry decided to go with his commander. He didn't want His Majesty to overwork. Daniel stood in the light and looked at the wall. The main character felt relieved at the sight of the boy. The healer was also happy to see the commander. He would be glad that the squad managed to win. The main character asked how the shooter sees. Yesterday his eyesight began to recover. To convey to Kemble that Daniel himself treated the survivors, despite his own injuries. He walked around using magic, although he himself did not see anything at that moment. Again, the boy faced harsh realities. The strategy was successful only thanks to Daniel. The main character told the guy about it. Jason said that if the healer wanted, the prince would give him enough money and he would never be in need of anything, and His Highness would make sure that the guy would never set foot on the battlefield again. First of all, he is a mercenary and is free to do as he sees fit. Daniel recalled that the commander called the shooter his trigger. The guy wanted to know the origin of this creature. Who, how, and why did it? And most importantly, why Wendon had to die for his friend. Daniel looked the Emperor's son in the eye and asked to be allowed to follow His Highness. The main character smiled. From this day on, the healer must follow Jason D. Kemble Urton. The prince summoned a priest to honor the memory of those who died in this brutal battle. Looking at the blue flames, the player reassured himself that there was no better way, as well as no better strategy. Jason chose a tactic, followed it, and got this result. The main character must take responsibility and carry it on his shoulders in order to move forward. The prince gave the order to collect all the corpses at the end of the informal funeral and move them to the crossroads. Every year, the loss of life is thousands. This is a world where funerals are more precious than life. There is an empty field on the west side of the crossroads. It is there that the dead should be buried and paid their respects. The last day of February each year will be designated as the day of their sacrifice, and not only theirs. This is a day for all the characters that the streamer killed without any remorse, going through the game hundreds of times. This will be the protagonist's redemption for all the blood spilled through his fault. Jason promised Larry that he would never fail again. The location is protected, rewards have been received and placed in the inventory. After the player left the forward operating base, it's been 3 days since they've been heading north towards the crossroads. The road was long and boring, and Kemble did not know what to do with himself. The prince amused himself by asking Larry every 5 minutes if they had arrived. The knight promised that they would come soon. Such a vague answer did not suit the player. This is not Yandex food, where they constantly answer that the order will arrive soon. After completing the training, Jason reached the 5th level, and a class choice became available to him. Despite the increase in stats, the player can choose any class that is available in Empire Defense. Scrolling through the list, the streamer saw the class of the rookie commander. He saw this for the first time. Kemble didn't even know which category to put the rookie commander in. A special class available after completing training, a hidden class. The skill of the indomitable commander, which the character then received, apparently hints that the player must choose a commander class. Indomitable commander, a skill created by a noble spirit that does not give up under any circumstances, grants immunity to mental debuffs to all allies. However, this skill is useless in the early game. It is risky to choose a class that the streamer has no information about. Then Larry's joyful voice rang out, and a crossroads appeared on the horizon. Crossroads? This was the name of the fortress built on the southern outskirts. In order to stop the monsters that were endlessly crawling out of the Black Lake. At one time, this fortress was the most important in the Empire, but gradually the invasion of monsters came to naught, and the army was redirected to another place. Due to the lack of an army, mercenaries were hired to defend the fortress. Veterans preparing to retire or newcomers with no experience. For mercenaries, neither their nationality nor qualifications mattered. The Empire just needs human shields to support this front line. As life itself lost its value, restaurants and hotels began to appear here. A decade later, the fortress turned into a city, and at one point, people stopped calling it that at all. Instead, the base is called the Walled City, a front battle with monsters. There was also another name, sounding like a mockery of the mercenaries who flew to their deaths, blinded by money just like moths. Suicide Street, the city of tombstones. This place is the Maginot Line, the crossroads. Looking through the screen, it's not very clear, but the city is still bigger than the player thought. And where it was shabby, it was impossible to convey it through the screen. Poverty was here too. In any case, this is the city for which the main character will be responsible. I could feel how heavy the air around me was. People were not happy about the arrival of the prince. But the people could be understood. Their newly appointed commander and lord had barely returned alive after killing his troops. The main character knew that something like this could happen. He thought through everything to the smallest detail. The attention of people was attracted by a cart with magic crystals. The prince deliberately put them in a cart, allowing the inhabitants of the city to see them, over 400 magic crystals of black spiders. Since they were high-level monsters, these crystals were extremely high quality. It wasn't hard to guess how much they were worth. So expensive that you can forget about money for a while. In order to smoothly progress through the plot, you need to cooperate with citizens. Now, people's trust in the Emperor's son is reduced to 0, but the player is not a fool. The main character knows how to increase this trust. After all, he went through this game from beginning to end. You just need to wait and follow the most effective way. Sooner or later, the prince will buy the hearts of the inhabitants and their trust will increase. Finally, Larry stopped the carriage and opened the door for his commander. The knight did a good job. The characters arrived at the lord's estate. Kemble was delighted that he would live in such a luxurious place. Compared to the house the player had lived in before, Jason didn't think he'd get a dream house like this. A boy in glasses ran out of the castle, waiting for the prince to return. The boy was worried about the lord. He had heard that the battle was fierce and difficult. He immediately began to apologize for calling the prince my lord, since Jason had previously asked him not to call him that. The boy took Campbell's hand He was so worried that the Lord might get hurt. Poor servant. He was thrown into the heat, then into the cold, and then it seemed to the main character that the pestering young man would remain completely gray. Alex handled all the administrative tasks of the intersection, from the construction of facilities to the maintenance of systems. The main character will have to rule the city with him. The servant has already filled the bathroom and cooked dinner for the prince. Campbell's mouth was open at such luxury, and this was all his domain. Jason gave the order to the knight to make sure that the soldiers rested, after which he could also go about his business for today. Larry wanted to object because he had to guard the prince, but the commander ordered him to continue his duties tomorrow. The knight was disappointed, but began to carry out the order of the prince. Alex called the Lord upstairs. Larry left with sadness in his heart. He liked working for Jason. It seems that the knight's room is on the first floor. The player is touched by Larry's loyalty. A relaxing and hot bath, as long as the main character has not taken a bath. Fatigue will be relieved like a hand, as well as get rid of the smell of blood after the battle. The trip was extremely exhausting, so the character was going to rest to the fullest today. Kimball thanked Alex and sent him to rest too. Today everyone should rest. The servant said it was amazing, calling the Lord an atypical nerd. These words resonated in the head of the main character. No one in this game should know about the origin of the prince. There was a long silence, the sound of running, which filled the whole room, deafened. Alex continued, he was amazed at the way the streamer went him through the training. It was beyond imagination. The protagonist's teeth gritted with rage. Is he really behind all this madness? That's right, Alex admitted that he was the director of the Empire's defense. Instead of cheers, the servant received a blow directly in the face. Michael took out all his anger on the director, through whose fault the player lost his real life. It turns out that the person who threw the main character into a hellish place is this bastard. Alex asked the streamer to calm down. He clearly did not expect such a reaction from the player. The director bowed and apologized for having to kidnap the guy. He went on to say that this world needs such a leader. These words did not make Michael feel better. He continued to beat the director. Sobbing, Mr. A apologized to Ross. He held up his hands in apology. Now the main character was ready to talk about what had happened. Michael tried to figure it out. It turns out that this game does not exist, as well as this world. The director confirmed the player's words. In this world, there is a true ending to the defense of the Empire, the only one that no one has reached. Mr. A has reset this world countless times in order to reach it, but he has never been able to achieve what he wants. And he decided to resort to the help of another person in the hope of success. The director changed the form of this world to a game world and presented it to players from another world. They were able to make good progress in things that Mr. A could not even think of. No one was successful. Michael was one of them. He had never heard of the true ending, but the atypical nerd was able to achieve what no one else could. Ross went through hellish difficulty with the Iron Man regime. He's the only one who was able to beat the game, and that's the reason why the streamer here, Mr. A, thought the guy could handle it. The words of the director again infuriated the main character, and he again decided to let off steam. The man not only kidnapped the player, but also threw him into impassable training and also into the body of such a psycho. These were technical chocolates. A bug of the game. The director also did not expect this. Mr. A asked to first tell the player about the reward he would receive if he could pass the defense of the Empire. If he brings this world to the true ending, then the director will fulfill the streamer's wish. Theoretically, in this world, the director is akin to a deity. It will not be difficult for him to generously reward him before returning him to Earth. Michael asked in disbelief if he could ask for anything. Ross asked about 10 billion won. The director suggested 100. This conversation caused mixed feelings in the main character, as if he was talking to a swindler. The guy was interested, but there was one wish that the streamer wanted to make a reality at any cost. Mr. A knew that the player already knew what he wanted, and that was something far more important than money. He has a dream that the hero has abandoned, thinking that he will never be able to fulfill it. This self-proclaimed deity knows more about Ross than he originally thought. I knew that the guy regretted something and had been living with this regret in his heart for a long time. As long as she lives in the heart of the protagonist, he will not be able to give her up. Since Mr. A has enough strength for this, shouldn't he be able to reach the ending on his own? In this world, his abilities are severely limited. Here, he is just an ordinary person. That is why he needs someone who would act on behalf of the director. Michael was interested in one question. What would happen to him if he died in this world? Alex laughed, because if the guy died, he would die in the real world. Life is a coin-operated game, no saves or loadings. Ross should have understood this perfectly well while playing the game. Indeed, the game has always been like this, caring about convenience, but when it came to death, it was ruthless. Mr. A said that if the player wants to return to Earth, he will arrange everything. In general, following the director's plan, he was supposed to ask the streamer about it upon arrival, but the system failed. Michael had to decide that if he helped the director achieve the true ending, he would be able to make his dream come true. Or he will return to a normal, peaceful life without putting himself at risk. The choice is only for Mr. Atypical Nerd. In a different scenario, the player would return immediately. But there are two things that prevent him from doing this. The first is the opportunity to make his dream come true. And the second, confidence. He has already played this game. The streamer knows almost everything about it. To go through it again, why not? Excitement played in the soul of the main character. Michael agreed. The director was very happy about it. He already thought that the guy would refuse. An atypical nerd is going to reach the true ending, so he counts on mutual help. Mr. A promised to fulfill the player's wish, and he fulfills his promises. Ross ordered Alex to sell all the magic crystals before morning. The servant was confused. He couldn't do it because it was already late. All the shops were closed. The Lord ordered the task to be completed by morning, and at night the servant will do it, or at dawn, he does not care. Alex said that for 338 black spider magic crystals, you can get a huge amount. Even after selling them at an average price, the servant wondered what the prince was going to do with such a pile of money. The emperor's son did not answer this question. He is not obliged to report. In the morning, the lord and his guard came to the mercenary guild. The main character decided to start with 100 twists. He was talking about gotcha. By morning, Alex, as he was obliged to, had sold all the magic crystals. It was very difficult to sell such a huge amount of goods, especially at such an early hour. The emperor's son knocked on the door and he and Larry waited for an answer. There was no answer, so Jason opened the door with his foot, which attracted the attention of all the mercenaries. The man roared furiously, who dared to act so boldly in this establishment. Kemble immediately lowered the man from heaven to earth, threatening him with the death penalty. He approached the mercenary and said that Jason was his future employer. People around began to whisper. Rumors that the third prince had killed all of his men on the front line quickly spread throughout the city. The Mercenaries Guild is a place where you can knock out new characters for yourself. Of course, their potential depends on rank. Looking around, the emperor's son noticed someone standing. The woman greeted the lord at the Crossroads Continental Mercenary Guild. This attitude embarrassed the main character a little. Kemble sat down next to him. His Majesty asked what the mercenary's name was. Her name was Venus. An SR rank light mage. The protagonist couldn't believe that this old woman was in the Mercenary Guild. The player had never seen such a uniform before. He was interested in which country it belonged. The form belonged to the Nickelback Empire. Venus was not surprised that the young man did not recognize it, since this model was created several decades ago. The woman gave 30 years of service in the Empire, was even the second captain of a squad of magicians. After retirement, he began to earn money by hiring. Jason noted that even after leaving, the mercenary is an exemplary soldier. This was not entirely true. Venus wondered what had brought His Highness here. Kemble said the answer was obvious. He had come here to hire someone useful. The woman asked if the young man wanted to hire someone to bait. Larry did not tolerate such an attitude towards the prince. Rumors of a battle on the front lines had spread far and wide. It seemed that the emperor's son had to pay dearly for his incompetence. They may be non-entities who are paid to fight, but they are not idiots to dig their own graves. None of the mercenaries wants to entrust their lives to a naive rookie commander. Then Jason stood up and began his speech about how everyone had come here to sell their lives in the end. They all ended up in this place because they didn't find a better way to make money, and now everyone is afraid to do what they came for. They also say that they are not idiots who dig their own graves. Kemble said that Lady Verena's words sounded strange and unwise in the present situation. The woman's career was defined as spectacular, but Jason knew that she had been fired for embezzlement of military funds. And this is already digging a grave. The lady clearly did not expect that the young man knew about her past. From corruption to smuggling goods, Venus was caught and kicked out of her job in disgrace. But the woman still proudly continues to wear a military uniform. The embodiment of corruption, a corrupt soldier, rotten to the core, a disgraced veteran, a fighter with impressive abilities, a heroine who looks more like a pirate than a warrior. It's all about one woman, the magician of light Venus. The lady objected. Even if her career ended on such a bad note, she was still proud to be a soldier of the empire. The woman asked the young man to take care of her. Then Kemble asked how much the mentioned pride of Venus was worth. The mercenary wanted to scare the guy away, saying that she needed at least 100,000 a year before the soldiers had time to finish. As Jason interrupted her and offered her 200,000, Venus dropped her cigar in surprise. This is a high price for a mercenary, however. The player is the prince of the empire and the lord of the city. He had just sold all 400 magic crystals, receiving a decent amount of money for them. This is not a waste. For the opportunity to buy SR rank, the main character is ready to pay any price. His Majesty bought the fear of Venus's death. He promised to pay twice the original bid. And cowards who do not want to sell their lives can go home. But if they are real mercenaries who want to earn more money. Tonight, the third prince is waiting for everyone on an empty field west of the crossroads. The next place where the main character went was the church. He came to heal his wounds, but a small scar still remains. A hidden R-rank heroine and the best healer, Saint Mariamne. Later the player will be able to recruit her by fulfilling a certain condition. However, today the character is not here for this. The girl, at the request of the prince, brought everyone who is free at the moment. Among the newcomers was Daniel. The guy adapted well here. It's time to go. Today will not be an easy day for the heroes. The prince has a lot of things planned. That evening, to the west of the crossroads, the coffins arrived from the forward base. The protagonist's gaze fell on Coleman's pendant. This is all that was left of the man. The spiders tore the body to shreds. The soldiers were built in as expected, and each coffin was inscribed with the coat of arms of the empire. A church choir sang nearby. In a city where death was so common and cheap, such a funeral was a rare sight. Most importantly, the families of the victims were paid monetary compensation. Shocked by the amount, people began to whisper. The news was passed from mouth to mouth and quickly spread among citizens. The main character was not going to embellish anything. Yes, this is an idea, but it is reasonable. Here on the front lines, the struggle must be known as a noble mission for the sake of humanity. The third prince and newly appointed lord intends to become a favorite of the townspeople. So far, Jason was known as a mad prince and did not inspire confidence. The main character began with the fact that, on the front line, everyone will die continuously. Every week, new graves will appear in this cemetery. The choir will sound again and again. But one thing the mercenaries must remember is that their death is much more expensive than survival. Funeral expenses and compensations hit the budget well. Almost half of the money raised from the crystals was spent on this. But death doesn't have to be cheap, so Kemble will try to save all lives. The main character will try to do everything to keep them alive and continue to work on the front line. Therefore, the prince advised the mercenaries not to die so easily, but to live and shake as much money as possible from the Lord. The player said everything he wanted. He was interested in how the townspeople would perceive this speech. He will prove to everyone with his results that he deserves to stand here more than anyone else. It's time to clear the first location. There were 3 days left before the cleanup. After the funeral, Jason went to the backyard of the estate. At this point, the protagonist decided to activate the teleportation gate. The rocks flew up and the gate began to fold before his eyes. Larry had never seen anything like it. The knight asked his majesty what it was. The lord explained that it was a gate that would transport the characters to the dungeon under the lake. This passage will lead them directly to the enemy base. The defense of the empire combines 2 genres. Defending towers and clearing monster bases. It's even written on the cover. Locations with monsters attacking the crossroads belong to the defense of towers. But in between passing the locations, when the enemies are not attacking, players can explore the dungeon under the lake and learn about the origin of the monsters. Dungeon clearing is an important mechanic for advancing in the game. It can be activated before passing one location. This is a damn difficult game, but it is not that difficult. The main character suffered a lot when he was trained. But now Michael has a pretty good start. He has Daniel, a healer, and an SR rank mercenary, Venus. Plus the player has a lot of money, which will make the game much easier. The passage seems to be a doable task. Very doable. The streamer told the rules of the game to Larry. and he said that they were going to scout the enemy base before the next location. The knight replied that he understood everything and was ready to go on a reconnaissance, which caused many questions from Jason. The protagonist thought it was going to be much more complicated. Larry must have been the one with the most questions. The prince whom he had served all his life suddenly changed, as well as the structure of the city, the location of the dungeon, despite the fact that he was in this city for the first time. That should have been enough to arouse suspicion, but Larry silently continued to follow orders. The commander asked the knight if he had any questions for the prince. After a short pause, Larry cleared his throat, the long wait making Michael sweat. Afterwards, the knight replied that he was just following Campbell's orders. He had no questions. The guy was his prince's shield and sword. He kills and protects on the orders of the commander. Jason did not believe that Larry had no questions. But the knight clearly trusts the commander. His loyalty is stronger than doubts. Campbell promised to generously reward the guard. Afterwards, the Emperor's son asked Larry if he was ready to go to hell with the player. The guy will gladly follow his commander, even straight to hell. The guys headed towards the lake, boldly entering the portal, after which the gate collapsed. A tip window popped up, saying that characters could be upgraded with equipment. The main character is angry that the system gives out useless advice. It's too late to pretend to be a caring game. The guys went out right in front of the lake, near the destroyed pier. Black Lake is a source of monsters, a hell that creates nightmares. A dungeon located on the southern outskirts of the world, which evokes terror. Larry noticed that the water in the middle of the lake had parted to the sides. Monsters in armor, or better said, began to crawl out from the bottom of the lake. Living armor, there was no one inside it. Transparent warriors continued to climb out. The main character did not care who he met in the first location, whether it was dwarves, mermaids, or wyverns. There are a lot of low-level monsters, but the atypical nerd got exactly those that he wanted to avoid. Jason panicked, blaming his luck on the situation. Larry didn't realize yet that they were at a great disadvantage and was ready to happily start fighting. Information about the opponents was updated. Their number exceeded 1,000. The knight paid attention to the Emperor's son, who turned very pale. Campbell barely whispered. He didn't want to repeat himself. He had already said this in training. But the characters were in complete shit. 741 times. That's how many times the streamer started the game from the beginning. There were various reasons for this, but if living armor awaited him in a new game, he immediately started the game again. Living armor fully corresponds to its name. Only ghosts hide under the armor. This means that this type of monster is extremely resistant to physical attacks. They become easier to fight closer to the second half of the game when a lot of different equipment appears. In the meantime, everything is very, very bad. The character has the feeling that someone is deliberately interfering in the game. With 3 days left before the opening of the first location, Jason gave the order. Heroes have no choice but to do everything in their power to defend themselves. Upon returning to the residence, the prince called Alex. They needed to talk urgently. Jason was interested in the state of the city's military strength. The servant replied that there were a total of 526 people in the city who were capable of standing on the front lines. The player was indignant. He made 100 pullovers in a row and got only 500 people. Alex corrected that during the training, most of the soldiers died in battle. The prince has already recruited all the mercenaries who have come to the city. The steamer can't hire anyone else within the city. Jason ordered the guy to send word to other cities and bring more soldiers. The Emperor's son is ready to double the usual rate of mercenaries. It is also worth sending news to the Imperial Palace. Monsters began to awaken. We need to get as much reinforcement as possible. Alex asked the Lord if he was sure of his order, since if they requested reinforcements from the Empire now, then a devastating event would occur later in the game. The protagonist could not do anything else. He needed to survive in the game, so Jason confirmed his order. The player also asked the servant to gather all the carpenters, masons, blacksmiths, and alchemists of the city. They must work in the interests of the prince. Alex warned my lord that if they did so, the production of magic stones would stop. Campbell is furious. The town is about to be pulverized, and the servant is worried about the production of pebbles. His Highness stood in his chambers and thought that the current level of difficulty of the game was completely atas. He couldn't decide for a long time, but there was no time to wait. The more difficult the game, the more variables to enter. Still, Michael chose the class of a novice commander. The guy decided to take a risk. The system received the long-awaited confirmation and launched confetti on the information board. But these were not all the surprises from the game. After the clown effects, the character's heart ached. A notification popped up that a 50% debuff would be applied to the growth stats. A 50% debuff will be applied to the item skill. The cry of the enraged son of the Emperor could be heard even in the street. Michael was furious at having so many debuffs undeservedly received. The streamer took the first thing that came to hand. It was a poker. The player wanted to nail Mr. A. At this moment, he was inundated with notifications about acquiring new skills. The guy began to learn the skills he had gained. Now he can upgrade all his soldiers. Even if the main character is standing in the field, everyone's attack and defense increases. Now Michael understands why he was debuffed. This approach to detail impressed an atypical nerd. The game is thought out to the smallest detail. Team synergy, the advantage of the commander class depending on the combination of classes of the team members, they receive different bonuses. For such a gamer, this class is ideal. It turns out to be a kind of interconnection system. The next morning, Jason waited for a report from Alex on the work done. It turned out that no one reacted to the orders of the third prince. The servant in a hurry was able to bring only the trade union leaders, and then only forcibly. The main character nervously suggested that these actions are called kidnapping. The leader of the blacksmiths' union was indignant that such lawlessness was happening in broad daylight. The leaders of the carpenters and masons' union were also dissatisfied. How dare they just take and drag the leaders here? And who would take responsibility for production? The alchemist believed that even if Kemble is a big shot, this does not negate the fact that there is a time and place for everything. Now, because of Alex's act, all the leaders were angry with the third prince. Jason thought that he should apologize. However, the speech of the Emperor's son did not look like an apology. The guy growled, "Do men really want to die a cruel death? At least the leaders understand where they are, and how dare they yell at the prince at the top of their lungs? Jason is their prince and lord. If he calls the leaders, then they must drop everything and run on all fours. How dare they hurt the feelings of the Emperor's son? Do they really want to lose their lives?" The leaders immediately began to apologize. For the first time they have a prince as a lord. Michael is even pleased to be Jason at such moments. After that, the negotiations went like clockwork. The men were much more willing to talk and enthusiastically listen to Campbell's proposals. The player offered them 20% of all the magic stones that the army would collect, at a price below the market value. The possibility of direct purchase of stones is beneficial for the leaders of the union. The prince proposed to establish trade relations. In return, whenever Kemble orders, military equipment must be crafted first. Of course, the lord will pay fairly, depending on the production. Using money and power, the streamer managed to negotiate with union members. At the moment, negotiations are the only thing that the main character can do now. The men were ready to start working for the lord right now. There is nothing more reliable in the world than money. Jason was pleased with the work done. There are 2 days and 13 hours left before the opening of the new location. 1,000 living armor is heading towards the city. Kemble gathered his guards and brought them up to speed on the approaching enemies. It was clear from the faces of their comrades that they were not mentally ready for such a difficult battle. By this time, Jason had thought of a plan of action that might work. Military Commander Larry is ready to give his best. Soldiers will be afraid and make mistakes. The task of the night is to set an inspiring example and lead the army. Emilia would be on duty too, and right now the squad needed her more than ever. The girl has nothing to worry about. She will not stand on the front line. Emilia, who is responsible for the water artifact, will not be directly involved in the fights. Since she is a civil servant, Jason cannot fire her, which means he will have to work. Venus was interested in the question, if she shows a good result, then whether there will be an increase. The line that makes her crazy about money, especially gold, is the gold rush, just like in the game. The prince replied that depending on the efforts made and the result, the salary may increase. Venus will be the captain of the special squad. Jason should think about where to get so much money to pay this woman's salary next year. Especially for Daniel, His Majesty has prepared a level 10 crossbow. A long-range shooter is ready to carry out the order of the prince. Daniel's posture betrays uncertainty, but judging by the way he handled the gun back then, he'll be fine. Jason noticed that the healer no longer wore glasses and asked the guy about it. The shooter's eyes see perfectly. He wore glasses to worsen his vision. But now the character's eyes are important to the prince, and Daniel is no longer going to wear them. For Alex, it was a relief. He was worried that there would be someone else in glasses. Kemble whispered furiously to the servant to just stand still. Residents of the city worked hard to defend the city, strengthened the walls, and patched holes. After discussing the strategy, Jason visited the south wall of the intersection to check on the workers. The wall is in poor condition. The restoration was neglected for a long time. The main character snapped at his servant. He said that he knew the fort well. The wall is the basis of the foundations. How did Alex allow this? The character began to make excuses. The fewer monsters appeared, the fewer stones he managed to get. The previous city lord reduced the budget. This fort was built primarily to contain monsters. Its function was reduced due to a decrease in income. Jason told the union leader that he didn't care how much money or materials the workers spent, but they had an obligation to strengthen and rebuild the wall. After that, the Lord looked into the workshop, where Kemble ordered the guys to make the walls in 2 days. The walls are high, about 3 meters high, so that they block the way. The workshop leader was at a loss. The monsters would easily break through the wooden walls. Campbell didn't need super strong ones to hold off the enemy. The man didn't understand the prince at all. His Highness repeated in the end that he needed incredibly high, incredibly voluminous walls. The whole city was busy preparing for the upcoming battle. Time flew by. There were 30 minutes left before the start. Everyone was ready and anxiously waiting. The knight noticed the approaching living armor, and the drum beat sounded. Jason ordered the army not to panic. They are just a bunch of monsters. Losers. The protagonist was lying. He was incredibly afraid of this fight. Living armor is the worst monster you can face in the first half of the game. Campbell's army, the strongest army in the southern part of the empire, is unmatched by any other military might. The player was lying again, in fact. They are just a ruined group of mercenaries consisting of retirees and amateur rookies. An army of water is at the ready, and the equipment is in excellent condition. Again, this is not true. No matter how much money is invested, they will never be fully ready. But the prince tried his best to convince the army otherwise, and so he shouted at the top of his lungs. The knights must follow the instructions of the commander-in-chief, and then tonight they will raise their glasses to victory. In this field, one anxious person, Michael, is enough. The streamer left the attacking first rows of opponents on Venus. Half of their power at the moment depends only on it. The Mage of Light, for which the main character paid a lot of money, went on the offensive. All the monsters had one common goal: to kill the people they met on the way. And if there are no obstacles, they will try to get as close to people as possible. It is obvious which way they will move, so the traps work perfectly. The city didn't have time to make them deep enough. The time of Venus has come. The woman decided to use her skill. So the mercenary hoped to make money on these monsters, the skill of the brightening zone. Venus killed a bunch of enemies who wanted to attack the city in an instant. The woman looked at the work done. Not all living armor was destroyed. The survivors began to stand up and look at the man who had destroyed dozens of armors. Venus urged monsters to respect their elders. She is not even capable of such a thing. This pattern is the mark of Venus. She is clearly up to something. Tonight, roasted snot armor, the mercenary used the second skill, relighting. The knights, curiously watching Venus, supported the woman. The first skill places marks on enemies who survive the attack. The second finishes off marked targets. Venus worked amazingly. Jason was glad he hired her. However, there are 1,000 enemies, and the size of Campbell's army is much smaller. The attack that had just been nothing more than a small dent for the enemies. Campbell ordered Venus to retreat, and the woman immediately began to carry out the order. The mercenary squad began to retreat. Venus ordered the recruits not to look back and move forward. Everything is going according to plan. The main thing is that everything works as it should. Jason gave the order for everyone to get ready. Living armor was very close to the recruits. They were very afraid of losing their lives. Venus motivated her soldiers. There was not much left to the gate. They needed to give their best. This part of the plan was a success. The Venus squad made it to the gate in humanity. Living armor was among the walls for the first time. The enemies were confused, standing in front of the walls. The next actions of the opponents were obvious: waste energy and break walls or move towards the goal. If Kemble completely blocked the path with walls, then the living armor would begin to break buildings. And now they have to crowd in a narrow space, which puts them at a disadvantage. The archers prepared to fire. They waited for the commander's order to open fire. Their ranks become narrower and narrower. They lose their mobility and become easy prey. The soldiers had been waiting for this opportunity for so long. It was time to open fire on the enemy. Jason ordered not to spare cartridges and kill as many of these creatures as possible. The armor had nowhere to run. It was an easy prey for archers. The basis of the basics among defensive games is the control of the path, the death zone. Jason's plan has worked as well as ever. So far, the army has not suffered any casualties, unlike the enemy troops. The commander-in-chief demanded to continue shooting at monsters while there were cartridges in stock. Living armor was not even able to overcome this point. Daniel wondered how long this method would work. Finally, the monsters came up with the idea of using shields for defense. The monsters lined up in rows. It will never end so easily. The opponents are too strong and smart. But the main character expected this, so he was well prepared for the battle with monsters. Now it's Amelia's turn. The girl must give her all. Kemble is counting on her. The girl gave the order to activate the artifact of the gravitational field. The magicians got down to business. The wind rose all around. The living armor began to move more slowly. The artifact had a good effect on them. Now it's Larry's turn. The ballisteri are ready to attack the opponents. They have a great opportunity while the artifact is activated. The knights were ordered to aim directly at the souls of the monsters, waiting for the shooting to begin. As soon as the ballisteri took aim, Larry allowed them to open fire on the enemies. Arrows pierced the living armor right through the shields. So far, victory was on Kemble's side. Jason increased his damage by using crossfire and finished them off with an artifact and ballistae. Everything was going according to plan until one of the servants ran up and said that the monsters had begun to go around the walls. The main character expected that this could happen, but there are more people who came up with it than expected. The commander ordered Venus to take over the armor, advancing from the right side. They must be driven away by hit-and-run tactics. It is important to save the lives of all recruits. Venus did a great job of blocking the monsters on the right. It remains to deal with the armor on the left side. Here, Daniel must get down to business. The guy needs to shoot monsters from the other side, no matter how scary the healer is. Daniel activated his eyes and began to destroy the living armor, hitting the target clearly. Eyes 1,000 miles away, the very fact that they can be used to pierce the core of the soul with an ordinary arrow. Venus is on the right, Daniel is on the left. The number of enemies killed is approaching 500. At this rate, the lodgers should not appear until the boss appears on the battlefield. Suddenly, the souls of the slain armor began to fly out of the dead bodies and fly upwards. They began to get together, circling in the sky. There was nothing like this in the game. Later, they began to draw something that looked like a monster, a ghostly knight of the 25th level. The boss of the army of living armor, it is he who gives strength to the legion, which in itself is not weak. But having dealt with him all, a boss awaits at the end of the battle. But the army of armor has not yet been finished. The Ghost Knight did not start resistance, did not apply debuffs, and did not attack, just floated in the air. The mere appearance of a huge monster in the sky caused the soldiers to panic. This is the difference between the war that people are used to and the one against monsters. The second gives rise to a primitive fear of the embodiment of supernatural ugliness. The appearance of the monster boss frightens the soldiers, as if bringing the remnants of the front line to their knees. Moreover, not only people are horrified at the sight of the monster, but also other living creatures. The stallion of Venus went berserk, and the mercenary could not resist and fell from her horse. The monsters saw the woman who had made the armor so angry. A cold drop of sweat flowed down the cheek of the main character. He cannot lose his trump card at such a crucial moment. The creatures rushed forward to kill the man in front of them. The recruits rushed to protect their commander. They could not allow her to die. Venus is the key element of the first location. Her squad is now in danger. Larry asked the Lord his permission to deploy the cannons and support the Venus squad. Jason forbade deploying cannons. If the kill box disappears, there will be more enemies who have infiltrated through the walls. The soldiers in a panic over the boss, the cannons and ballistae stopped firing, and the already shitty defenses weakened. The main character continued, "You need to focus on restoring the kill box." Jason asked Venus for forgiveness in his mind, hoping her squad would cope. Fortunately, the mercenary came to her senses. She smashed her head and understood where she was. Venus's subordinate tried to bring the woman to her senses. He said that she needed to get out of the battlefield. The squad is in a shitty state. The mercenary has no time to lie on Mother Earth. The rescue team will arrive soon. We must hold out until then. The living armor was rushing straight at the woman, who could barely stand on her feet after breaking through her skull. The man bravely defended his commander by hitting the monster well. However, the living armor survived. This blow did not cause much damage to it. The recruit was at a loss as to why the monster could still stand after such a blow. However, the man did not notice the danger from behind. He was pierced through by a spear. The recruit was sure that he had destroyed all enemies nearby. However, one of the monsters found the strength to take a weapon in his hand and strike. During this time, other armor managed to run in. They immediately pounced on the wounded man. There was no way to save him. Venus looked at what was happening and could not help him. In return, the mercenary promised to deep fry all the armor. But she can't control magic now. Venus looked at her hand hopelessly. The entire mercenary squad was dying right before our eyes, monsters tearing the recruits apart. Someone decided to abandon everything and save themselves, leaving the battlefield. But this did not save him. The unfinished monster swung and threw a spear directly at the fleeing target. Without giving a chance for salvation, the armor successfully hit the man. The tiny line of defense consisting of only a few people was destroyed in an instant. Venus could smell the living armor in front of her, the stench of rusted armor and blooming water. The smell of the drowned. They should have stayed at the bottom of the lake. The mercenaries' revenge would be cruel. Venus was furious why these monsters would not allow her to just make money. This time, the woman managed to use magic. She hit her targets. It turned out weakly, even less than a quarter of what she could before. Venus understood that this was her last battle. She was gone. The monsters were approaching. The woman asked the remaining recruit to run. She would buy time for him. At least one must survive this battle. Let him run while he can. The brave young man decided that the best option for him was to stay. The second rule of mercenary survival is to always stay close to a mage from the squad. The boy is sure that he has a better chance of surviving being near Venus than running away without even a horse. The survival strategy of the small one was effective. The woman watched him. He did not kill the living armor of the young man, but pushed it away with his spear. He promised to delay the enemies by any means possible while Venus prepared the spell. Daniel provided support from within the walls of the castle. The gunner did everything in his power. But it wasn't enough to stop all the enemies. There were too many of them. By the time Venus was able to muster enough energy to create a new single lightning bolt, the boy's body had been pierced by spears. The only brave young man left who did not run away at the first opportunity. The mercenary unleashed all her anger on the army of living armor. She would be able to save the boy by gathering enough energy a few seconds faster. Venus approached the dying recruit and told him that the first rule of a mercenary's survival was not to take a job that paid a suspiciously large amount. All the rules for the boy's survival turned out to be wrong and let him down. The mercenary will not be able to succeed if he follows such stupid rules. If a mercenary wants to be damn rich and famous, he should only take jobs that are damn dangerous and pay a hell of a lot. Venus lost her entire squad and went alone to kill the living armor. And you should never rely on magicians, because they are ready to take all the responsibility. First of all, if a young man wanted to survive, he should never have become a mercenary. Venus does not even have enough strength to light a cigarette. Her hands are so weak that it is impossible to take something with them. The woman thought that her life would become easier after she received a high salary. And it ends there. I didn't even manage to smoke at the end. Larry could not stand aside. He arrived as soon as he could. The mercenary's soul was relieved. The knight instantly killed the opponents who threatened his comrade. Some time ago, within the walls of the fortress, Jason tried to bring the soldiers' feelings. With the skill of an indomitable commander, Kemble wanted to motivate the army. The soldiers began to behave unnaturally. Fear instantly evaporated in their bodies. The indomitable commander grants all soldiers within 10 meters immunity to all mental debuffs. Realizing what was going on, Jason sent Larry to rescue the Venus squad. He will lead the rescue squad. In addition to rescuing the mercenary, Larry needs to open the gate. The knight needs to head to the Valley of Death and save his comrade. An incredibly stupid order. But Larry promised to return as soon as possible. The guy did not even hesitate and immediately went to Venus to help. Using his skill, the main character continued to bring the soldiers back to their senses. After defeating a squad of armor that came close to Venus, Larry grabbed the mercenary by the scruff of the neck and put her on a horse. The mercenary's rescue went according to plan. The monsters were left behind, looking after them puzzled. Without hesitation, the living armor decided to throw its spears at the people leaving on horseback. Venus was even frightened. She thought that she would not be able to dodge the attack. But Larry parried the spears. The woman offered the brave knight to get acquainted with her granddaughter. A lovely girl, he was not in the mood for jokes. Larry advised the mercenary to recuperate for the next attack. The guy was nice to his master, but when the prince is not around, Larry becomes colder than ice. Venus thanked the knight for saving him, to which he replied that he was simply following the order of his highness. In turn, Larry apologized for not approaching earlier and could not save the rest of the squad. However, Venus believed that it was necessary to feel sorry after they dealt with all the monsters. It's been a long time since the old hag was so angry. She just wanted to make more money, but she only got into trouble. Thanks to the skill of the indomitable commander, the kill box was restored in time. The main character was glad that Larry and Venus returned safe and sound. But Jason lost 4 precious heroes. The streamer was too confident in his gaming experience. In the game, Michael had to control the mentality of the soldiers. There were similar states such as fear and absent-mindedness. But here the feelings of the soldiers are more diverse and complex. The player did not expect that the horse would also be frightened. Jason needs to take into account more variables. As this is reality, the flames spread due to the artillery cannons are also the result of reality. The kill box was falling apart, and living armor was making its way through the walls en masse. It seems that the army will still have to fight along the fortress wall. The character wanted to end all this one artillery fire. Fortunately, there are not so many monsters left. The goal is certainly possible. The field is still under the control of the player. Larry reported that he had successfully saved the Lady Venus by reluctantly adding the title to the name. The guy didn't approve of her because of the reason for his dismissal, but it was right for him to show respect. Jason was glad that Venus was alive, but the mercenary was ashamed that she had made many mistakes. The woman reproached herself. Because of her, the recruits died in vain. She considered it a personal shame. The main character dotted all the I's. Venus could not know that a monster would appear in the sky, just as she did not know that the horses would go crazy. Venus still takes responsibility for her subordinates, standing on the battlefield at her age. With her experience under her belt, the woman believed that she had to react properly. The mercenary dreamed of revenge. Promising to be the one to decapitate this monster, Venus decided to kill as many enemies as possible. Jason advised the woman to focus on her recovery. Her strength will be needed very soon. The killer box no longer performed its functions. The commander-in-chief ordered a ceasefire. Daniel should also rest. The enemies are approaching. There is a larger fish for him. The living armor reached the walls of the fortress. They began to destroy the fortress, realizing that the walls could not be destroyed. The monsters began to climb up the wall, thereby complicating the situation. The main character gave the order to everyone to prepare for close combat. The soldiers immediately lined up ready for battle. The melee team went forward. A battle without magic, based solely on physical strength. This is the beginning of a real war. The captain's army was ready to attack, but Jason waited. The living armor did not rise too quickly. It was necessary to wait until it was at the right level. Choosing the right moment, the player ordered to start dropping stones. Kemble foresaw such a scenario and prepared for it. These are pieces of stones, steel, and other debris left after reinforcement. This method of dealing with intruders turned out to be quite effective. Many living armor thrown to the ground shattered on it, but some managed to get up again after falling and climb the wall. Too annoying will to live infuriated the main character. They continued to climb despite all this garbage falling on them. Then the commander-in-chief decided to try to shoot down monsters with spears. It's time to reorganize the party. Venus is the main link in this whole chain here. Jason has activated the synergies of the team. A team of defenders of the territory with 1 commander and a dumble mage with 2 mages. Attack power is increased by 20%. The enemies have already climbed the fortress. From this moment, the battle ceases to be one-sided. Kemble was worried about whether the soldiers would be able to cope with living armor. Larry successfully destroyed enemies. They did not cause much trouble for the night. The guy ordered the soldiers to hold off the monsters in place while he destroyed the armor. It's not a matter of whether they can handle it or not. The soldiers have to do it. To survive, all knights must be stronger. They have no choice but to fall, get up again, fight, and win. Jason asked Amelia to activate the artifact, increasing the speed of the soldiers. The girl immediately got down to business, activating the artifact at speed. All teammates' movement speed has been increased by 5% for 5 minutes. The main character activated the equipment, which spread to the allies. Soldiers successfully detained and pushed living armor off the wall. Larry's first skill is a strike of iron will. The more enemies he kills, the stronger he becomes. The knight alone dealt with enemies, but this is not enough. Jason's army began to lose. There were many wounded, their number was growing. Unlike armor, monsters didn't care about damage. Daniel was also eager to fight, to the front line, but the boy must use his power against the boss. Jason was thinking that he should have reduced the number of victims when suddenly a fire broke out around him. Fire engulfed the entire area. Even the main character did not expect such an event, but looking closely, he saw that it was all the work of Amelia. The girl fried the enemies with her skill. Kemble was very surprised that she could use magic. It was very useful now. Amelia did not understand the commander's surprise. She could always do this. After all, the girl is a magician. Hearing this, the prince promised to promote the mage, but Amelia would be better off if she was fired. The character spent a lot of mana on using fire. Deciding to support the mana-depleted girl, Jason promised to pay a good bonus. Amelia dreamed of retirement. The commander asked the girl to turn on the fire. Despite the depletion of mana, Jason begged to do it one last time. With the command to fire, Kemble directed Amelia's flames in the right direction, burning his opponents. 20% of the synergy and 5% of the attack totem, for a total of 25% increased fire magic. Calling the girl a flamethrower, Jason asked to open fire again. Amelia asked to address her as a person. So the soldiers held back the enemies with themselves. Larry cut them with a sword. Amelia burned them to hell with her fire. This was the end. All living armor was defeated. 1,000-strong army was defeated. The soldiers rejoiced. They coped with an incredibly difficult task. Kemble was in a hurry to disappoint the knights as a boss battle awaited them. A living knight collected armor from dead monsters, creating armor for himself. Finally, the boss took on his true form and was ready to start fighting. The soldiers instantly panicked, hurrying to take cover from the angry monster. Jason began to doubt if there was any point in all this. It could not be Loki's boss. The monster looked at Campbell, its enemy. The sight of such a strong opponent made the protagonist shiver. Jason forbade himself to be afraid. He told himself that this was just a stage 1 boss. The monster is only level 25. On command, the gunners opened fire. They are ordered not to save shells. The boss continued to approach the castle, the archers hurrying until the monster reached the walls of the front. Despite the fire that engulfed him, the ghostly knight took a step forward. The commander-in-chief ordered Amelia to activate the third artifact. The girl was mentally unprepared. An R-rank artifact multiplier can increase the effect of a character's magic spells by 100%. For Venus, by increasing her spell effect, everything is now in the hands of the mercenary. The woman felt incredibly strong, just like in the old days. Jason advised to hit as if it were the last time, preferably to aim at the chest plate. The mercenary asked His Majesty to be careful. No one would pay him compensation if the prince was electrocuted. Venus unleashed all her might on the ghost knight in hopes of inflicting a lot of damage on him. It worked well, melting the boss armor, thereby opening access to the monster's soul core. It was Daniel's turn. The boy aimed his arrow directly at the soul of the enemy. The gunner activated an eye 1,000 miles away and pulled the lever confidently. A clear hit on the target, the arrow pierced through the core of the monster's soul. Jason was delighted. He thought he had defeated his boss. However, this was not enough. The angry ghost knight towered over the soldiers. Bringing down his sword, he would destroy the walls of the front. Raising his weapon so high in the midst of a thunderstorm, the monster begs to be struck by lightning. As expected, the boss was completely electrocuted. It turned out to immobilize him for a while. And then Venus decided to fry the ghostly knight with her lightning. Noticing that the monster's sword was falling on the wall, the commander ordered the soldiers to run away. Dust rose into the air from the impact of the weapon on the fortress. It was difficult to see anything. As soon as the dust settled, Jason stepped closer to see what had happened. The armor collected on the ghost knight crumbled and began to crumble. Finally, they defeated the monster. The battle was difficult, but interesting for the player. The souls of the monsters were rapidly leaving the scene. It looked dangerous. The main character knew this pattern. This is what an outburst of anger from the realization of imminent death looks like. A display of fear, confusion, and madness. This attack does no damage but can drive you crazy. Using the skill of an indomitable commander, Jason ordered the souls to get out. This is where the territory of people begins. After that, the souls disappeared into thin air, leaving behind a golden glow. The clouds parted and the sunlight began to illuminate the city again. The soldiers peeked out of their hiding places, not believing that the monster had been defeated. The commander-in-chief proudly announced the victory over the monsters. The army was not only able to survive, preserving its strength as much as possible, but also to heroically win. The fear in the eyes of the soldiers began to recede. It was confidently replaced by the joy of victory. Jason didn't know if it was because of his passive skill or his ability to make speeches, but he was still pleased. The commander shouted from the bottom of his heart that the army would destroy all the monsters and live. Location 1 is protected. The reward for clearing Stage 1 has been received. The characters should check the inventory. On the evening after the battle, a festival unfolded in the city center. Over a glass of beer, Jason congratulated everyone on defending the front from living armor. And with a well-deserved victory, the character offered to raise mugs for this. The commander-in-chief allowed citizens to drink to their heart's content. Today he pays for everything. The holiday began, people sang songs, drank beer, and had a hearty dinner. Larry, noticing that the prince was sitting aside, approached him and asked him to eat. The knight saw that the commander had not eaten anything that day. Campbell's expression did not match the commander's expression, which led to victory, the guy noticed. He had stopped 1,000 living armors without much loss. Larry believed that the prince needed to be a little happier. Here the main character wanted to justify himself. He did not suffer great losses. After taking a sip, Jason immediately spat it all out again, making a disgruntled face. Larry was worried about the Lord. He was fine. The player just thought that the taste would be different. The drink turned out to be stronger. It felt like 20 degrees, no less. There were no major losses, but this does not mean that there were none at all. If someone dies, Jason doesn't care how much the end loss is. Every life is important and every person is valuable. The prince understands that he cannot save everyone in such a cruel game. This idea is presumptuous. But if the main character had been a little more careful, people would not have died. This fight was different from training. Here he could change the course of events. Jason knew that, and it hurt him more. Larry remarked that the commander-in-chief had done a great job. He shouldn't be so upset. The knight knew that whatever he said, his words would not make His Majesty's regret disappear. However, this is a celebration of victory, and if the prince is not happy, then neither are his soldiers. Larry asked the commander to smile at least now and rejoice in the victory with everyone else. The guy was right. Smiling is also the job of the commander, Jason smiled. Suddenly, Alex appeared from behind. He fully supported Larry's point of view. It is certainly important to mourn the victims, but they must also find time to celebrate the victory. Since eating meat alone is unhealthy, the servant brought the prince vegetables, but Jason had not yet eaten meat. Alex congratulated the Lord on clearing the first location. It was not easy, but the player coped. The guy wished to continue the Emperor's son in the same vein. The servant's words confused the player. Without hesitation, the main character took the tomato in his hand, which was bewilderment on the part of Alex, whether His Majesty was eating vegetables. The servant began to wave his arms and attract the attention of the citizens. The prince did not eat anything and now chokes on vegetables. Suddenly, apologies were heard. The soldiers began to call themselves selfish. They could not believe it. They forced the emperor's son, who was rumored to eat only meat, to eat vegetables. One man took on the role of commander and forced others to bring meat to His Highness. Also, the men brought a lot of alcohol and actively began to drink the prince. Jason didn't know how it had come to this. He had planned to rewatch the battle in a quiet corner today. Suddenly, a modest low voice was heard from behind, calling out to His Majesty. Emilia, obviously too drunk, took the commander-in-chief by the hand. She was embarrassed. Bursting into tears, the mage begged her to be fired. She could no longer be in battle. Jason laughed and told the girl to work harder. No one gets fired in such difficult times. He could only offer the girl a salary increase. Emilia's behavior amazed the magicians. The men decided to take away the drunken mistress, who was clearly unable to get home on her own. Daniel was also nobly drunk. He sat next to him and giggled. Jason tensed up. Hiccup, the healer, noticed that the water was a little bitter. It was not water. Venus was sitting next to him, pouring alcohol on the boy. Semble was terrified. In response to the commander's uncomprehending exclamations, the woman replied that the young man was no longer a boy, but a full-fledged mercenary and should know how to drink and smoke. Venus perceived him as her own grandson and personally decided to teach him the basics of such a life. Daniel clung to his highness, resting his head on his shoulder. This behavior amused Jason. The guy clearly became braver from their first meeting. After that, the boy was carried to the revelations. He admitted that when he was alone, the face of a dead friend stood before his eyes. He can't stop thinking about that day. The guilt of living is gnawing at the healer's heart. Blushing, Daniel continued, "When he is next to the prince, he feels better." That was why the boy was always by his highness's side, after which the shooter passed out. Jason thought about how it wasn't because he was special. It was a passive skill he couldn't talk about. Picking up the topic, Venus shared that next to the Emperor's son, her magic becomes stronger. It's not about the leadership vein, as others thought, but about skills and synergy. The main character cannot tell this either. The player did not think that it would be so difficult. Larry also decided to tell about his feelings when the prince is near. The knight's doubts disappear. The body becomes light and fast. Then the streamer realized why the knight was always next to him. After that, the characters decided to raise a toast to the dead, the survivors and the commander. The men demanded that the prince drink to the bottom. Jason was embarrassed in such an environment. He said that he did not feel well. The soldiers immediately began to apologize, making excuses that they did not know that they were bad at raising their spirits. The men repented that they had made the lord who had been drinking for weeks not drink a drop. Mike was horrified by Jason's reputation for the life this godforsaken prince led. The main character stood up and began to shout that they forced his highness to drink. The consequences would be deplorable. The mugs were immediately filled to the brim with a strong drink. Jason decided to gorge himself on trash. As long as the moon shone brightly in the night sky, they ate, drank, sang, and chatted. The night of victory went on. The main character got indecently drunk, but before going to bed, he decided to open the chest received for clearing. The first chest was a max-level SSR rank, and the room was filled with a bright light. After Jason realized what had fallen to him, the player shivered. Angry, he threw his glove at the wall. Out of all the variety of objects, he got a consolation prize. Gauntlet of Lucky Strike. Each stat as a percentage receives a 1% bonus. The damage caused by these gloves is determined by the tape measure. Sometimes the player tested them on streams to amuse subscribers. In fact, gloves are absolutely useless, but at least something. The main character cannot throw them away or give them to someone. Looking at his hands in disappointment, Jason thought that he would get lucky at roulette and hit the jackpot. Taking a deep breath, the player repeated that he needed to be optimistic. There were so many cheating items that could make life easier. Kemble went berserk again. Through clenched teeth, Jason was angry. Despite receiving a rare gold item, he tossed and turned all night. The next day in the late afternoon, the main character woke up, feeling as if a train had passed over him. A staggering Larry appeared in front of the prince's face. He looked even worse. Kemble asked the guard how he was feeling. The guy should rest. Larry wanted to make excuses that he had no right to rest, as he began to vomit. Apparently, he also drank a lot yesterday. Then Alex appeared with tea. He happily greeted the guys. Jason wondered why the guy was always full of energy. The servant brought water with honey, promising that it would help with a hangover, but you need to drink to the bottom. The main character felt instantly better. Larry decided to drink all the remaining healing water. It's time to start preparing for the next stage. In the current state, they will not stop wild animals. The main character understood that now the army is powerless against monsters. He wondered how much it would take to repair. After thinking about it, the Union leader replied that it would take more than 2 weeks. First, he needed to raise this sword. Then the soldiers who were not injured will help with the restoration of the walls starting tomorrow. After that, Jason asked Alex what was going on with the reinforcements. The neighboring city would send soldiers in the near future. The soldiers sent to the central area would return tomorrow. The player thought to see at least some progress. He will have to wait until tomorrow. He can figure out everything else for now. It remains only to pray that they get there in one piece and safety. The Emperor's son asked Alex to let him know if something happened, and the prince and Larry would do everything in their power. He meant clearing, destroying the hotbed of monsters, their goal, this black lake. Only this time, Jason decided to go with the rest of the squad. It's time to change the genre of the game from defense to dungeon attack. The prince told the crew members that tomorrow morning they were going on an expedition. It would be easier if they saw with their own eyes than Kemble would explain 100 times. Saying goodbye, Amelia burst into tears, but there was nothing to be done. The dungeon was designed for 5. For Alex, Jason gave him the task of preparing provisions for the expedition, namely canned food, camping supplies, potions, as well as lanterns and torches, in general, everything that can illuminate. The next morning, the party gathered in the backyard of the Lord's Manor. Venus already sensed something was wrong. It didn't look like an ordinary expedition. Jason created a portal which surprised the mercenary. She had never seen teleportation magic. This magic disappeared a few hundred years ago, and the Emperor's son, who did not know magic, was able to create such a thing. The commander said that they would understand everything in the course of events, and now the squad was going to teleport to the nest of monsters, which was located under the Black Lake. There from the kingdom, hearing such terrible words, Amelia fell into a panic. Jason continued, he wants to investigate the place to understand why monsters appear from there. This is the only way to stop the invasions. The prince sought to do away with the monsters forever by destroying their source. This is the true goal of the game. The commander would instruct the guys on the way there. Larry asked to be the first to enter the portal. During the teleportation, the system gave another unnecessary advice, which angered the player. Venus had seen this place before. She had been here 20 years ago, when the royal soldiers were still at the crossroads. Then the soldiers received an order to cover the lake with earth. It seems that 20 years ago, a fool was at the helm. The entire magic squad was involved. They tried to use magic to raise the earth and fill the lake. The task was a failure from the very beginning. No matter how many stones and earth descended, the lake endlessly absorbed them. Rumors spread everywhere among the royal army that the lake was connected to hell itself. After the first idea of trying, monsters began to appear in droves. The army retreated. The plan failed. Since then, Venus was so close to the lake for the first time. Jason told everyone to be on the lookout as they were about to go deeper. Amelia was shaking with fear. The main character opened the menu and pressed the button to enter the Lake Kingdom. The entrance to the dungeon opened right at the pier. The commander-in-chief came closer. And then he jumped into the water first, setting an example for the team. It's dark. The first impression is darkness. You can't see anything around, but you can hear sounds. Sounds like darkness was approaching, and Larry, who had lost his prince, screamed nearby. The order was given to remain calm and turn on the light. The knight was the first to light the torch. Amelia decided not to waste time on useless tools and lit her own fire. Looking around, the characters noticed a huge castle, a lake kingdom lost among the water, and at the same time, a nest of monsters, which the squad must gradually clean up well. The protagonist was surprised that he could breathe underwater and move around without any problems. It seems to be due to the ancient magic that envelops the kingdom. It preserves the land underwater. Amelia wondered how something huge could be hiding under the lake and how they could move around safely. Larry was the first to hear footsteps. Someone was approaching the squad, and a dark figure could be seen in the distance. Someone with long gray hair to the floor. Someone moved barefoot. The player began to calm down the subordinates. They were not approached by the enemy. They entered the dungeon for the first time. It should be NPS. Someone began the dialogue first, suggesting that the guests were treasure hunters looking for something to profit from in the Lake Kingdom. As the NPS came closer, the moonlight illuminated the beautiful girl's face. She said that this was not what the wanderers were looking for. They should return to the surface. At this point, Jason doubted. He had never seen such a character here. In Hell, which is an underwater dungeon, there are about 100 of them. One random NPS should act as a guide. But the streamer started the game 742 times, and this girl never appeared. The player took a step forward. He said that people came from the surface to stir up a hornet's nest. Because of the monsters that come out of here, the world on the other side of the water surface suffers. The girl said that the Lake Kingdom has long been plunged into a nightmare. No one will ever be able to wake it up. Countless heroes and great warriors have tried to remove the curse from this place, but the attempts were in vain. All of them remained at the bottom of the lake. The mysterious girl asked them not to enter the darkness and return before it was too late, until the abyss swallowed them up and before they went mad with regret. If Jason was really going to go back because of such words, then he would have returned from the game to his world a long time ago. After all, he is the Lord of the Crossroads, a walled city that exists for the purpose of stopping monsters. Kemble is responsible for protecting the front and protecting humanity. Darkness does not scare the hero. The team must enter and destroy this damn hotbed of monsters. That is why the inhabitants of the walled city have come such a long way. But the doors are locked, and no matter how much they want to enter, they will not be able to enter. So there must be another way. The commander asked for help from a stranger. The girl agreed. She was curious to see if the guest's words were really full of courage or just reckless bravado. The stranger asked to follow her. Jason asked the girl's name, but she no longer remembered it. But if it is so important for the guests, then they can call her Irida. For some time now, the characters have been following Iris along the walls. Larry protested. He did not want to trust the stranger. What if a trap awaited them there? The prince calmed the night. In the end, the girl stopped and said that guests could come here and get inside. It was a sewer system. Irida warned the guys that there was so much there. Hunched over his backs and walking down a narrow passage for 5 minutes, the protagonist walked through the arch. The squad got to the first area, the sewers. They reached the dungeon of the Lake Kingdom. All sewage is connected here. The pipes are dry. You can't even hear dripping water. The commander-in-chief has opened a portal here. This is a safe zone. The monsters cannot enter here. Next time, they will be able to start directly from here. Emilia began to ask to go home again. The crew was not dragging so much food here just to turn around. Iris approached Jason and said that she would not go any further. From now on, they were on their own. Finally, the NPS warned that this realm has already completely taken over the nightmare. The further they go, the thicker the darkness will become, and the monsters will be stronger. And if the girl's words mean nothing, Irida decided to give a little advice. Never and under no circumstances should the lights be turned off. Irida blessed the path of the heroes. This time, Larry had many questions about who this girl was and how it was possible to live in the underwater kingdom. Daniel was frightened by the darkness here. It was strange. Even eyes 1,000 miles away could not see anything in it. The healer was interested in the question of how the girl moved without a torch, to which Campbell had no answer. This dungeon is full of secrets. Even Michael, who has completed the game, does not know all of them. The only thing that the main character knows is that they will meet with Iris again, then they will ask. After a little rest, the squad was ready to move out. Given the level of the team, it should have problems. Larry wondered how long they would have to wander the corridors, and the knight was worried about the prince's safety. The main structure of the dungeon is the rooms and the passages connecting them. In the rooms, you can find some items and fight enemies, or chat with NPS. In the first room, large sewer rats of the 3rd level are waiting for them. Huge sewer rats. The enemy is not difficult, but because of the large number, not to relax. Emilia, seeing the rats, immediately screamed in fear. Jason was surprised at such a coward. Larry is ahead. His task is to kill only those who get too fast. His Majesty warned Daniel that the skulls of rats were very strong. He should aim for the eyes or neck. The task of mages is not to waste mana, to kill only those who have made their way through Larry's defenses. Kemble decided to just watch the work of the team. The guys quickly coped with the enemies. The knight reported that 13 rats had been killed. He wondered if it was worth collecting crystals. Since monsters were low level, crystals were not needed. Jason stood up, 13 rats, and the system said there were 14. A lost rodent that was hiding on the wall attacked the main character. The commander began to run away from the big rat in a panic. He did not expect such a sudden appearance of the monster. Without realizing it, Jason activated the gloves in response to the rat's attack. The numbers 121 fell out on the jackpot. After they fell into place, the gloves worked. The monster immediately fried under the laser attack of the main character. Kemble was struck by the effect of the gloves. A lucky blow, a number above 100, is a great rarity. The personal guard was afraid for Jason. Larry would not forgive himself if something happened to the prince. The knight asked the commander how he managed to defeat the rat with one blow. Since the player could not tell the truth about clears, chests, and lucky gloves, he said that it was a blow from the prince. Sweating, Jason began to concoct a legend on the fly that when royals were in danger, they could activate superpower. The streamer prayed that Larry would just take it for granted. Everyone except Larry still doubted this excuse, but they moved on anyway. Room number 2 is empty. There must be something hidden here. The members of the squad need to search more carefully. Daniel seemed to have found something. Jason was glad Mr. Clairvoyance had found something. The boy found the chest. The prince asked him to be careful, as it could turn out to be a trap. Before the protagonist could finish speaking, Venus swept past him to the treasure. The passive talent of the gold rush activated. Kemble was horrified. Because of her mania, a mercenary could easily fall into a trap. He wouldn't want to lose a greedy grandmother in this way. Seeing that it was indeed a treasure chest, the prince breathed a sigh of relief. Venus only now realized how she had behaved in front of the emperor's son, disobeying the order. In an attempt to make amends, the mercenary brought the chest to his highness, but gold coins peeked out of the woman's pocket. Having easily cleared the third room, the squad finally reached the main one. In front of the characters, there was a huge door, behind which the boss was hiding. Determined to motivate the team, Jason said that after they finished with the boss, they could return home, so they needed to do their best. Behind the door, there were mountains of dead, huge sewer rats. The stench was terrible. Rats. There was no end to the rats. There was a smell of blood everywhere. The boss kept repeating that he had to kill the rats. He continued to kill the rats and repeated that he had to exterminate them all. The boss wanted to return the Lake Kingdom to its original appearance. The monster spoke like a human. Such a sight stunned Daniel. The boy had never met such creatures. Hearing the rustling behind him, the boss turned around, thinking that some rat was still alive. A giant human rat who controls the sewers of the Pali. Threatening to kill everyone, the boss rushed at the squad. Larry instinctively stood in front of Jason to protect him. Scared as hell, Amelia closed her eyes and fired fire at the monster. The girl asked not to approach the boss. She still sat with her eyes closed, emitting fire. In the hall, in addition to the smell of rotten meat, there was a smell of fried rat meat. However, this seemed not enough to the boss. He came to his senses and tried to attack the squad again. Then it was Venus's turn. Concentrating a bolt of lightning, the mercenary took good aim at the monster. Lightning passed directly through the head of the human rat. He was still on his feet. In the next second, he was completely electrocuted. The monster had no chance here. Surprisingly, clearing the boss's hall was very quick and relaxed. Thanks to the joint work of the two magicians, it was not difficult to deal with the boss. His magic resistance is almost zero. If the party relied only on physical damage, there would be problems. Amelia grabbed Jason's sleeve, hoping to go home. The room was filled with dead rats. The girl was terrified. The squad reached the chest. Everyone was interested in what was hidden in it. The commander turned to Larry and asked him to hold Venus just in case. The knight took the order too literally, taking the mercenary in his arms. This time, a cool serrated sword fell out. The main character was delighted. A level 15 rat cutter, when attacking a monster like Crimea, deals 25% more damage. The prince gave the weapon to Larry. The guy's eyes lit up. The rat cutter was not good enough to replace the usual sword, but it would definitely come in handy in this place. There was still a summoning scroll in the chest. It was a guaranteed drop item of the first area. Jason would be lying if he said that he did not come here for it. All the treasures were collected. There was no point in staying here anymore. Amelia was happy. Going down the corridor connected to the boss's team, the sewers ended. This is where the inner part of the Lake Kingdom begins. The second area, a hidden alley. Kemble was amazed. Everything was so developed, it looked like the streets of a prosperous city, since even a back alley looked like this. A city that has become the embodiment of a magical society, a true reflection of the stuck deep realm. But in this developed city there is no light, just as there is not a single living soul. The city was mired in darkness, undead and dead, with only one lonely lantern burning in the darkness. The protagonist unlocked the portal in the second area. A notification popped up that they could not leave the area. In any case, Jason was not going to go further with his squad today. Otherwise, there would be horns and legs left. The squad has done a good job. That's all for today. It's time to go home. The research is over, the character levels have increased, and the squad has disappeared. A man who had seen the heroes approach the lantern, he quickly realized that it was Jason, the last player. He made all the way here. The man took out his flute and played his song, summoning an army of rats. The rat lord laughed mysteriously and asked for forgiveness for his sins. He was confident in his cause, all for the sake of the Lake Kingdom. Finally, the party returned home, to the back house of the Lord's manor. Jason praised the guys and advised them to have a good rest tonight. Venus doubted that she would be able to rest. She was amazed at how such a huge city was hidden under the lake. The woman could not imagine what had happened to it. Moreover, this darkness is definitely unusual. It seems to be alive. The mercenary asked the prince if he had anything to say. At the moment, he did not know what to tell them. He himself was frightened by this darkness. Although Michael went through the entire game, how and why the Lake Kingdom became like this was not revealed to him, but the streamer had a premonition that he should go to the center of the city and reveal all its secrets. The only thing that Kemble knew for sure was that he and the squad would deal with everything in order. Venus doubted that she would be able to fall asleep with a sober head today. She would have to get drunk. Emilia also wanted to go with Venus. The girl believed that she would not sleep either if she did not drink something strong. The mercenary promised to take the young lady to a good place. Mages get along well. Daniel decided to return to the temple. He still has goosebumps from this darkness. The boy was sure that if he prayed, he would feel better. The guys should also rest. Today was a difficult day morally and physically. Larry asked if the prince was going to descend into the dungeon again, and he replied that not before the next defensive battle. The knight asked if they would go on a scouting mission to find out which monster would attack next. Jason replied that they had already found out. Larry didn't understand when the prince had time to find out, so he explained that next time they would fight against a squad of sewer rats. The Lake Kingdom is infested with rats. They first fill all the research zones. Their population reaches the limit of their number. There are too many of them, and then the monsters crawl out of the dungeon. Those rats with whom the team fought today are those with whom the guys will face. No sooner had the guys entered the castle than Alex rushed to His Majesty. He had an emergency. As it turned out, there were no reinforcements. The central and nearby cities said that they would not be able to send troops. More gray hair appeared on the head of the main character. Cold sweat went down his body. However, the conversation was interrupted by Larry's hungry stomach, rumbling so loudly that Alex fell silent. The knight immediately began to apologize. Jason thought that there was no point in continuing the topic now. He still couldn't solve the problem now. Kemble decided to postpone this problem until tomorrow, and now the player wanted a good dinner. The next morning, Jason was full of energy to solve important problems. Recently, a war has unfolded on the Western Front, and the Empire is currently fighting the enemy. They are gathering all the free soldiers and sending them west, so there are no reinforcements that they could send. Something was wrong here. The Empire was constantly at war with neighboring countries, but now they suddenly needed all the soldiers of the South, and at the very moment when Jason was calling for reinforcements. The main character asked, "What about mercenaries?" Alex replied that they hire everyone, but there are not so many of them. The prince's last battle had ended a few days ago. It would be foolish to expect the mercenary guild to be replenished immediately. Jason was at a complete loss. He didn't know what to do in such a case. When the player looked at Alex, he was furious. The servant is standing there smiling, grabbing his face. Kemble asking where to get the soldiers. The servant had one idea, but the man who can help them is a pain in the ass. Streamer began to shout that he didn't care about his ass in the current situation. He only cared about the next battle. The Lord demanded new soldiers. Alex smiled and told them to follow him. No sooner had the characters left the palace than they met Larry. He wondered where Alex and the prince were going. Without hesitation, he replied that the Emperor's son was on his way to the previous lord, namely to Montgomery Oakman. Larry did not even ask if he could go with them. It was not discussed. On the way, Jason asked who the Oakmans were. Alex replied loudly that they were the counts protecting the border. They have more powers than regular counts, tasked with protecting the front from enemies, monsters, and natural disasters. In other words, they are not just nobles. They are military commanders who are also responsible for protecting the region. Ever since people began to come to the crossroads, Montgomery Oakman had been in charge of everything. The city was named after him. The Oakman family paved a road and erected a walled city on top. It turned out to be Crossroads. Montgomery came from a noble family and protected this place for a long time since its creation. The main character was interested in why he left his post. Alex continued the story. The southern front is far from the center, where Oakman has much more influence than the emperor himself. However, Montgomery resigned as lord and placed the city under the control of the center, so Jason took his place. For some reason, the picture did not come together from puzzles. He refused the land that had been passed down from generation to generation. Alex gave up. He replied that it was not easy to explain. The prince had better hear firsthand. By this time, the characters had just arrived at their destination. Initially, this place was only a vacation home, but after leaving office, Earl Montgomery Oakman moved here permanently. The prince doubted that anyone lived here. Alex replied that he constantly sends important things here. A gray-haired man came out of the house and asked who had come to him. As he spilled the bottle of drink, he shouted in fury how people dared to enter here. The servant rushed to Montgomery, reminding him that his name was Alex. The man immediately recognized his young secretary friend. Kemble was a little confused if this drunk was Oakman, the former lord of the city, looking like an ordinary grumpy old man who needs a nurse. Alex happily said that he had led the guest to Montgomery. The man began to grumble. He asked not to bring anyone to him. Then the young secretary introduced Oakman to the new lord, His Highness Jason D. Kemble Urton. The protagonist politely introduced himself as the youngest of the Emperor's sons, and the newly appointed Lord of the Crossroads. Despite the fact that Jason is a tyrant, he cannot have a bad relationship with the Count. The player was a little embarrassed to say this correctly, as if a new private was standing in front of the commander. The streamer had just begun to say that they had arrived to talk about the soldiers, when the old man interrupted him and told him to go away. Kemble asked again, dumbfounded. The guy thought he was imagining. Montgomery began to shout for the guest to go away. It was already crossing all boundaries. The Nickelback Empire is a state with a strict caste system. Even if Oakman ruled these lands, how dare he neglect formalities in conversation with the prince? Enraged, Jason shouted, asking if it wasn't too impertinent for Montgomery to raise his voice at the Emperor's son, let alone throw him out. The main character decided to remind the impudent man of the hierarchy. In such a strict empire, he at least understands what it means to take up arms against a member of the ruling family. Oakman demanded that the third prince get away, which means that someone has definitely gone cuckoo, and crazy people should be avoided. This time, Kemble decided to leave, but he promised to return, hoping for a reasonable conversation. At this point, Larry could not stand it. He wanted to attack Montgomery, but the prince did not allow him to do so. Montgomery Oakman, full name Mitch Montgomery, has never appeared in the defense of the Empire, but the reason the streamer knows him. He is the father of the best tank in the Carolina Crocs game. Carolina has incredible skills and is one of the most popular SSR rank characters. This old drunk must have a good side. The player hoped that he would still manage to get along with him. The main character decided to ask how this old man could solve the Lord's problem. Alex replied that Montgomery had his own personal army.